the presentation slides that we will be going through, the draft PAC recommendations report. Should have the meeting summary from PAC meeting number 5, which was emailed to you a week ago. And there is a flyer that is announcing public comment opportunities for the Oregon Transportation Commission. If you're missing any of those things, let us know, and we'll make sure you get a complete packet. And to our observers out in the room, thank you very much for being here. We're very happy to have you. We do have a public comment period coming up, and I'm taking note of how many people we have, and then we'll decide how much time you'll have to address the PAC at that point. As I said, this is a big meeting. Before I do the agenda, why don't we do introductions? And I think I'll start to my left. Well, I'm Penny Mabee with Enviro Issues, the facilitator for this committee.
Chris Strickler, Washington State DOT.
Bernie Bottomley, TriMet.
Marie Dodds, AAA Oregon.
Phil Ditzler, FHWA.
Matt Grum with Commissioner Dan Saltzman, fill in for Brendan Finn.
Paul Savas, Clackamas County.
Chris Hagerbaumer, Oregon Environmental Council.
Ann McInerney-Ogle, Mayor for the City of Vancouver.
Pam Treese, Westside Economic Alliance.
Park Woodworth, Ride Connection.
Sean O'Halloran, Oregon Transportation Commission.
Orlando Simpson, Oregon Transportation Commission.
Jessica Vega-Peterson, Multnomah County Commission.
Ryan Winsheimer, ODOT Region 1.
Eileen Quiring, Clark County.
Garrett Kransky with the Street Trust.
Roy Rogers, Washington County Commission.
Marion Haynes, Portland Business Alliance.
Craig Dirksen, representing the Metro Council.
And I'm Judith Gray, ODOT's project manager.
Thank you, everyone. Glad to see so many of you here today. All right, so on our agenda, it doesn't say that we're doing a lot, but it is a lot that we're doing. We are working on the recommendations that you will be forwarding to the Oregon Transportation Commission. We've broken it down. We're going to go do a little bit step-by-step process. The first thing we'll do is make sure that the approach that the team has taken in putting the recommendations report together works for you. Then we'll do, Kirsten will do an overview of the report to make sure that you have a good understanding of all the pieces that are in there. And then we will, and all that will be brief, and then we will spend the majority of our time talking about the 6 key questions that are encompassed in the draft report, and trying to find where you all stand on those 6 key questions so that they can be reflected in the final report. Let me see here. We also should take a look at the summary from meeting number 5. Did anyone have any concerns or edits to it? I didn't receive any. Emma, did we get any? No? Okay. Anyone have any objections to us making that final? Any objections? Okay. All right. Thanks. We'll make that one final. And that brings us to the summary of this meeting. Because it will be an attachment to the final report, you're going to be getting it very quickly. As a matter of fact, you'll receive the draft summary by this Wednesday. We'd like you to take Wednesday, as soon as you get it, Thursday, to look it over and get any comments back to us by noon on Friday so that we can finalize it so it can become an attachment to the recommendations report. So watch for that coming to you on Wednesday, and I'll remind you again at the end of the meeting. And I should be advancing slides. So here we are. Emma, you've been taking care of me behind my back, haven't you? Great, thanks. Here we are. This is a very familiar slide. You've seen this at almost every meeting, I think. Just reminding you again where we are very, very early in the full process schedule. As you can see, we are approaching the end of your formal work as at the advisory committee, and then there will be much more work done between ODOT and the OTC just to get to the end of the year, and then there are many more years of work ahead. And the project roadmap that was shared with you, I think, a couple of meetings ago, again, the key message here, very, very early, many more steps to come after December of 2018. A big step that will follow after that is project scoping studies, and that's, you know, that's a big step, and so there will still be lots and lots of opportunity for input, influence, and considerations. Okay, so with that, what I would like to do is ask our co-chairs if you would like to get us started with any wonderful words of wisdom. And you guys switch seats on me. You're just trying to confuse me at the very end, right?
I did not place the name placards.
Yeah.
But it does feel like my hair is parted on the other side. I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for the time and engagement, and look forward to listening and learning, and we'll wrap it up. And Penny, it's perfectly okay if we yield back time. So we can allow for a little more public comment and whatever.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. All right, well, we'll move on to public comment then, and I currently have 9 people that have signed up for public comment. Do I have any additional ones out there? Okay, well, let's be really generous, and let's give each of you 2 minutes. And I'm going to start with John Lay, then John Charles, and Doug Allen, but I will be very firm and ask you to stop at the 2-minute mark. John, please.
Due to increased traffic diversion.
15 seconds.
Use is flat on I-66. Finally, half of the tolls collected on I-66 go to the cost of collection. That hasn't been reported to this body or the citizens. Sadly, I feel this entire process has been a sham, ignoring the input and concerns of both average citizens
That's time, sir.
and the PAC members.
Thank you very much.
You chastise the people around the table for voting, and then you ask them for a vote at the last meeting.
Thank you very much. John Charles, followed by Doug Allen, and then Rachel Dawson.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is John Charles, president of Cascade Policy Institute, a nonprofit policy research organization, and I've been a long-time proponent of congestion pricing for probably over 30 years. And I have a couple brief comments. One is that regardless of what you pick today, I hope that the goal here is to maximize vehicle throughput of existing lanes, not maximize revenue. The revenue that it throws off is secondary. And the tolling rates should be set to maximize throughput, because a properly functioning highway can likely have twice the per vehicle per hour throughput of an improperly priced highway. So the value proposition that you're selling to people is that they can go at least 45 to 50 miles per hour in priced lanes, and that should be your goal. Second, I'd like to suggest, second and last, a different option for you today, and that is price all of I-205 from the river down to Wilsonville. That would be the pilot project. It's long enough to generate a lot of evidence. You can reinvest the money in expanded capacity, because there's a huge amount of publicly owned right-of-way in the I-205 corridor. No eminent domain needed. Clearly there is capacity needed, and you could generate pretty quickly, I think, results that would help people understand that this can be a really good thing, and would also leave I-5 unpriced for those people who feel that's really important. So I think just I-205 from top to bottom should be thrown on the table as a possible pilot project. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Allen, followed by Rachel Dawson and Jacob Puckett.
Hello. Thank you all for your time spent on this project. I think it's great work you've done, and there's still a lot of unanswered questions. On the last day, I'd like to toss out just one more idea. I wish I'd thought of it earlier. There's been a lot of interest in option C, or even going beyond option C, to look at tolling the whole system. And I think rather than recommending option B as an implementation path, you should look at a variety of ways of implementing the whole system. And another way to consider is start with an initial subset of entrance ramps, with tolling only on that subset of entrance ramps. And that could gradually be expanded to more entrance ramps and then converted to a mileage-based system if that's what you needed in the long run. But I think that would be quite an efficient and publicly acceptable approach to implementation of a system like this. And I agree with John Charles about tolling for freeway operation rather than tolling for revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rachel Dawson, followed by Jacob Puckett, and then Terry Parker.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Dawson. And as the gentleman spoke before me, I read through the number of alternatives you have proposed and noticed that there was no option to only value price the entirety of I-205. I'm from Westland, so this might seem counterintuitive as I live in the I-205 corridor and would be affected by this decision. But I think that it would benefit the rampant congestion that I see day to day in the area. Now, you wrote in the value pricing feasibility analysis that you want a pilot project in the area that will allow the public to become accustomed to the system before it is deployed more broadly, and tolling just I-205 will do just that. This pilot project would demonstrate to drivers, including those commuting from Vancouver on I-5, how beneficial, effective, and fun it would be to drive on an uncongested roadway. Now, you would also be giving the tolling authority the ability to end the program if it does not provide the anticipated results. Tolling just a portion of I-205 wouldn't give you an accurate depiction of how value pricing would work on a large scale and would doom the project from the beginning. Now, this test would be cutting edge because no other city is tolling all lanes on a single freeway. When people see how well tolling I-205 works, I have no doubt that they'll be more willing to have it implemented elsewhere in Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacob Puckett, followed by Terry Parker and Ron Swarren.
Members of the committee, I want to draw your attention to an aspect of congestion pricing that I believe is often overlooked, but is still just as valuable. And that is how value-priced roads would benefit the poor. One of the main objections that I've read to this proposal is that it would harm poor people, making them pay for roads that were once free. And while on the surface this might not seem fair, there are several aspects of the current free road system that are just as unfair. Most poor people actually take public transit to get to work. 1/3 of poor commuters drive their own cars and thus end up stuck in congested traffic just like everybody else. This costs an average commuter $1,000 per year in wasted time and fuel, according to a Texas A&M study, which makes a large dent in a smaller paycheck. Less congested roads would save these drivers both time and money, and it would also result in faster commute times for the poor workers who take the bus or the train instead. Another important aspect is pollution. Auto emissions caused by congestion have been linked with higher levels of asthma, cancer, and preterm births. And these effects are worst closest to the freeway. And most people living close to the freeway are poor residents in older housing which offers less protection from this pollution. Less congested roads would reduce pollution and improve public health. A study of a comparable turnpike in New Jersey found that reduced congestion from value pricing lowered premature and unhealthy birth rates by 11%. By putting in place congestion pricing, we would be better able to decrease both travel times and health risks, both of which, as they currently stand, disproportionately affect the poor. And we will be better able to build safer and more reliable roadways for all residents. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Terry Parker, followed by Ron Swarren and Christian Treble.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Terry Parker. I'm generally opposed to tolling, in part because the alternatives don't pay their own way, and motorists actually subsidize the alternatives. If it is done, it should be done like in South King County, where one lane is tolled, and usually that's the people that are in a rush. And all the dollars should go to increasing motor vehicle capacity. The capacity on the highways have not been increased for 30 years when light rail was built. The city of Portland, PBOT, is reducing automobile capacity on our streets with road diets, creating congestion, creating more fuel consumption. Where's the alternative for people to go? Where's the diversion that people can get off the freeway to avoid the tolls? On more congested streets, we need to make the bicyclists help pay. And if that includes tolling the bike lanes, it includes tolling the bike lanes. And transit should become more self-sustainable. Let's be fair about this. 59% of low-income people drive to work. And that's right out of the City of Portland's study. Population growth is the problem here. We need to have a conversation about population growth, because that's what's affecting transportation, that's what's affecting housing. You see, you can't build your way out of transportation, we can't build our way out of housing either then. Maybe, and this is kind of off the wall, but maybe we ought to look at what Trump's doing, build a wall around the city of Portland. Or at least do what Tom McCall said, divert I-5 around Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Swarren, followed by Christian Treble and Brenda Perry.
Morning. Ron Swarren, Portland, Oregon. My basic statement is I think there should be a synergy between people who want more road capacity and those who want transit and other alternatives. I don't think these need to be competing ideas. My basic objection to tolling on existing routes is it's a type of rationing of something that we already have. And we do have the capability of putting in additional capacity. And so we shouldn't be rationing when we have that capability. I believe that increased capacity could meet our increasing freight needs. I've read that the freight traffic is expected to increase by 75% by 2030. And I've also become very aware that the projected population increases of 500,000 by maybe 2040 in the metropolitan area. I'm not sure. That's very real too. So these two factors are really going to put a lot of pressure on our routes. But we don't need to have a dilemma between increased capacity and transit and alternatives. I've been talking about what I call the Western Arterial route, which is a well-studied route going west of Portland from Vancouver to the West Union Junction. And this route would have not only advantages for freight and commuters, but it also have advantages for transit. For example, C-Tran could have an express system that would connect to 6 TriMet routes and to the MAX station. TriMet has also said that they would like to increase their north-south capacity. So this is something that we can do. It's affordable. It gives both freight, commuters, and transit users choice. And I think it would also be hard to administer the equity considerations. That's another complicated thing in this whole process. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian Treble, followed by Brenda Perry and Naomi Fast.
Hi, my name is Christian Treble. I'm from the Overlook Neighborhood Association. It's all right, everyone gets it wrong. I'm here to talk about Concept B, Alberta going to Multnomah. The Alberta going exit is in our neighborhood, and we have some serious concerns about the effects of diversion into Overlook and all of North Portland. For those of you unfamiliar with North Portland, we have higher rates than the rest of Portland of lower income households, young households, diverse households based on race and ethnicity, and more car dependence. This will have serious impact on us if you place the toll at one of the most popular entrances to the highway for North Portland, and an easy off point for people traveling south to avoid the tolling. Indeed, I think it's hard for me to imagine you've even looked carefully at this. There's a half mile from going to I-405 that is very popular. Would everyone in North Portland be expected to pay that just to get on 405? The diversion issues, there's the costs, obviously, placed on households that are mostly able to afford it. I haven't seen any mitigation efforts proposed in the plan to deal with that in a serious way. There's a lot of nebulous ideas, but before implementing a pilot project, I think you need to something concrete. And then there's safety. On page 28 of Memorandum 4, it seems like the safety solution is increased congestion. It notes that, it should be noted that surface streets, non-freeway roadways with higher levels of congestion generally exhibit lower serious crash rates per mile than uncongested surface streets. That is not very comforting to the neighborhood that will have to deal with all of that congestion as a trade-off for safety.
15 seconds.
As Interstate and Vancouver Williams and MLK become more congested, the neighborhoods, streets deeper in will be affected, Colonial, Denver, and so on. We are not opposed to tolling. We, in fact, kind of like tolling the whole system here from the get-go. What we are opposed to is creating a situation that will encourage people to divert into Overlook and North Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. Brenda Perry, followed by Naomi Fast. Is there anyone else who has not signed up yet that wishes to make public comment? Anna, can you run that out? I think there's someone else. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Brenda Perry. I'm Council President for West Lynn, and thank you for all your work on this committee. We recently had 2 presentations from ODOT down in West Lynn. As you know, I'm very concerned about the diversion issues. The first one was looking at the retrofitting of the Abernathy Bridge, which is going to impact West Lynn for potentially 3 years of traffic. Now, we badly need this doing, so we're going to need to support this. But this is one of the most congested areas that we have in West Lynn, and we have 3 years of traffic concerns with doing this. Then the next day we had an open house, which was really nice to have it locally. It allowed some of our citizens to get to and understand some of the issues going on with the widening, which of course there's no money for right now. So I went to one side and I talked to the value pricing people, and they said, well, no, we can't put a toll on that area until it's widened. I went to the other side of the room and talked to somebody else, and they said, no, the tolling's going to pay for that widening. And then I went to a third person, and I said, how long would it take you to get the money to pay for that widening? And he said, about 30 years. So it's a dilemma. It's really a dilemma. We have potentially work going on that road, so if you toll it, that's going to add to the issues. It's really a safety issue for us. We already see diversion, and we expect to see a lot more. So I don't envy you your task. I'm not anti-tolling, because I think it's a good way for us to help raise some money to help our transportation systems in Portland, which desperately need some help. But you're going to need to put a lot of thought in this, and just please put some consideration for us in West Lynn as we sit astride one of the bottlenecks and one of the areas that you're likely to toll. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Naomi Fast, followed by Scott Tilgner.
I usually write comments, so please forgive my nerves. I'm not as comfortable up here, but I'm here to say that I'm very in favor of congestion pricing, and I have concerns about diversion as well, but as a bicyclist, I ride a bicycle for my transportation. I do not own a car. I actually took a bus here this morning, and so I would like all the revenue from various whichever plan you end up with to go to bus connections to neighborhoods, as well as car-free ways to bike from Washington County to Portland and various other maybe 10-mile-out communities to Portland. There are many of us just waiting for a signed path that we can use to commute We would really like that. And it would be helpful if it was signed so that we could find it. Out in Washington County, renters who, for example, live across from Nike pay for the roads via the MSTIP property taxes. So renters who may be car-free must pay for a parking spot, whether they own a car or not, and they do pay for road widenings, which don't necessarily benefit them. So if the revenue from the congestion pricing could please go to bike and bus connections, that would really help with the diversion. That's and also help preserve our climate for our future generations.
15 seconds.
I think that's just about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Scott Tilgner.
How's it going, everybody? All right, so I got here because I live in Vancouver. I go to work out in Hillsborough. I work for a confidential client out there. I work in project management. I don't envy what you guys are trying to do, but I don't think you're necessarily going about it the right way. Every day I go out there and I work for a very large client out there. I think you guys know who that might be. I'm not going to say their name, right? But so I cross the bridge, then I get on the Max, right all the way out there, right? Hour and a half drive. But if you were to toll the bridge, I'd still have to pay that toll, right? I'm not sure if that's really fair, but you know, I think it might be a little ridiculous if I have to pay a toll and then ride the Max all the way out there. But you know, I have probably 500 Max tickets in my wallet from that. But you know, I think a better way to go about this might be for a long term. You know, if we're looking at 30 years down the road, let's build another bridge. I mean, your population is only going to grow, and if you actually start talking to clients of Portland, like, you know, the Intels, the Nikes, you know, your large banks in Portland, you know, their clients, the trucking industries, do they really want to toll on the federal bridges where, you know, your clients bring their customers? I don't think so. I think that's a really bad idea.
15 seconds.
Yeah. So take that into consideration, because billions of dollars come across that bridge that aren't people that live in Washington or Oregon. And that's also going to take away a lot of money from Portland. Not to mention Jantzen Beach, going to go away if that toll happens. Jantzen Beach isn't even going to be here anymore.
Time.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would wish to make public comment? And a blanket apology to anybody whose name's pronunciation I massacred. I tend to do it pretty reliably, so my apologies. Thank you all for your comments. We really appreciate your patience and your adherence to the ground rules and your thoughtful input. With that, I think we should move on to the heart of the meeting, and that is to begin discussion of the draft PAC recommendation. Kirsten is coming to the table. Thank you, Kirsten. So as I said earlier, this is going to be a kind of a multi-part. We're going to do this piece by piece, step by step. So the way we're going to do that is Kirsten is going to share with you the presentation of the draft recommendation. We want to make sure that we want to review the approach and the organization so that it's well understood. Then Kirsten will go through what's in the draft recommendation, and then we will, as a group, deliberate and attempt to finalize the recommendation today. So be patient with us. Again, it's going to be step by step. So I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten, and she's going to do the first couple of steps for us. Kirsten?
Great. Thank you, Penny.
Do you want to run them, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll run it too. Thank you. So like Penny said, I'll run through a quick overview of the recommendation structure, and a very high-level overview of the contents, because for the next couple of hours, the priority is hearing from the PAC about the draft PAC recommendation. The draft recommendation is in your packet, and it may be useful to look at that as we walk through. We do have page numbers noted at the top of the PowerPoint slides denoting where we are in the recommendation, so that folks can find that. The draft recommendation represents what the project team has heard from the PAC, especially at PAC meeting 4, where the PAC discussed mitigation priorities, and at PAC number 5, where the PAC had an opportunity to talk about some of the pricing concepts in the consultant recommendation. So to talk through the recommendation outline or framework, there are 5 components of the recommendation. The first is the context, and that is some information about the purpose and intent of the recommendation. The second part and the third part relate directly to the PAC charge, which we spent some time on at the first 2 PAC meetings. So the second section is mitigation priorities, or ways to reduce the potential impacts of pricing on potentially affected communities. The third section is on recommended pricing concepts, so to the charter question of location and type on I-5 and 205, again consistent with the PAC charter. The fourth section is other topics of importance to the PAC, and as the PAC discussed the components of the charter, so sections 2 and 3, many other issues came up that we attempted to capture and include in the draft recommendation. So we'll talk through that as well. And then the fifth part is the individual written comment from the PAC members. And I think Penny will go over this in a moment, but the project team recognizes that there is a diversity of opinions around the PAC table. And so to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to discuss the recommendation in their own words, this fifth section will include letters from PAC members related to the PAC recommendation. And those will be due on Friday, which I believe is June 29th at noon, and emailed to Penny. And we'll say that again later in the meeting. So at this point, I'll stop and ask if there are any questions about the structure of the recommendation, not the content, but the structure, and then I'll provide a brief overview of the content. Okay, okay, great. So looking at the draft recommendation that the PAC has in its packet, the first section is an introduction, and that is information about House Bill 2017, some information about the PAC's charge. It's also some information about the process to date supporting the PAC discussion, so the technical analysis and the public outreach that has been done to date at a very high level. Other information on the process can be found in your previous packets, or it's available on the value pricing website. Section 2 of the recommendation, or of the draft recommendation, is getting into the PAC's draft recommendation to the OTC. So this has several pieces to it, and I'll walk through those again at a very high level. The first section is the context of the recommendation. So this is legislative context, legal context, OTC, information about the OTC request. That's all in that first section. Some key components, if you're following along, it starts at the bottom of page 2-1. The legislature requires the OTC to submit a proposal to FHWA by the end of 2018. I think we've talked about that every meeting. And the PAC is advisory to the OTC. In terms of the nature of the PAC discussion today, the OTC does not require PAC consensus, and that was written into the PAC charter, and minority opinions are welcome and will be captured, and we'll talk a little bit about how that will happen when we get to the discussion portion of this agenda item. Also to note, further planning, analysis, mitigation development, and public engagement will be conducted. So thinking back to that roadmap graphic, there's still a lot to come. There will need to be more specificity put to the mitigation discussion once the process is further down the road. And again, this recommendation is the first milestone in a longer term process. So the recommendation is oriented to which type, location, and mitigations should move forward along the roadmap for further analysis. The other piece that's captured by section 2.1 in the recommendation is some information about monitoring and reporting, and just ensuring that the OTC understands that everybody is on the same page, that monitoring is required by the federal government under many pricing programs moving forward. The second section, and if you're following along in your packet, it's on page 2-3, and actually, is that right? No. Yes, it's right, sorry. Yeah, it's on page 2-3, and in just a moment, we will be confirming these priorities with the PAC. Overall, pricing is intended to improve overall mobility, and it's intended to provide benefits. But there is more work needed to identify the level and extent of potential negative impacts. And the PAC has discussed a lot of ways to do this, and that is what the team is capturing in the mitigation priorities. They are not listed in any particular order on the slide. To recap what those are, and you'll see those listed on page 2-4, key priorities that the project team heard from the PAC was improved public transportation and other transportation options are essential strategies for equity and mobility. We also heard that special provisions are needed for environmental justice populations, including low-income communities. And we also heard that diversion strategies should be incorporated to minimize and mitigate negative impacts. So this is the kind of diversion that would be the diversion that would leave the freeway and go onto the regional system. There, as we've talked before, there are many different definitions of diversion, but this mitigation priority is specifically about the mitigation that would go to the regional system. So that's section 2. Section 3 includes recommended pricing concepts, and that begins on page 2-5 in your report. So these are the recommendations around type of location that would warrant further traffic, revenue, and environmental analysis moving forward. And the PAC will recall that at PAC 5, the consultant team presented a recommendation, and it had 3 components. The first component was an initial implementation of pricing programs on both I-5 and I-205, specifically Concept B, which is tolling all lanes of I-5 from going to Multnomah, and Concept E, which is tolling all lanes of the Abernathy Bridge, including a new additional lane in each direction. The second part of the recommendation was looking forward to a longer-term vision, recognizing that Concept C, which is tolling all lanes of I-5 and I-205, in phases with a more comprehensive plan to look at pricing and its relevance for highways beyond I-5 and I-205. And then the third part of the consultant recommendation was that anything needs to be implemented in conjunction with mitigation strategies. So the project team had presented this to the PAC at the last meeting, and on the screen are some things that we heard from the PAC at that meeting. So we heard about pricing as a way to add capacity, pricing as a way to avoid adding capacity. There was support for concept C as a vision and identifying B and or E as a first step. There was support for concept C as an initial project. There was also support for modifying E to ensure it addresses the additional planned I-205 lane. So to be really clear about that for concept E. And we heard interest in pricing on both I-5 and I-205. So what we've brought to you today is a modified recommendation intended to clarify and reflect some of the discussion that we heard. So what you'll see on the screen is that there's a blue hashing down near the Abernathy Bridge area on 205. And that is showing, it's a clarification for two reasons. The first is that it's demonstrating that concept E is intended to also include the third planned lane between Stafford and Abernathy, and that the second reason is that it shows that there is still discussion around the termini of what that concept could look like. So the end point and beginning point is still something that could be figured out and would be figured out in future analysis. And then again, implementing that in conjunction with mitigation strategies. And then finally, the input on other topics. That is on page 2-8. And the team captured a lot of the discussion from the PAC to date in these bullet points. Again, these are in no priority, and in addition to conversation on the concepts themselves, Penny will be asking the PAC about their opinions about these other topics toward the end of the discussion. So some of the main ideas that we have heard from the PAC to date include that a pricing analysis and holistic planning are needed for the regional freeway system. So beyond I-5 and 205, also 84, 405, 26, 217, taking a broader look at the system as a whole. We also heard that as the region grows, we need to plan for adding roadway and public transportation capacity in a pricing environment. So using pricing as a tool to have a conversation about increased roadway and transit or public transportation capacity in the region. And then the third, the group has been interested in revenue and how revenue should be used. So hearing a lot that the revenue should be used to relieve traffic congestion within the region, as well as to mitigate potential negative impacts. And then finally, section 5 is not written yet. This is the placeholder for the letters from PAC members, and we can share that deadline again with you all, and these will go directly to the OTC, unedited, as part of the report, and the OTC's next meeting on this topic is July 12th, and we'll provide more information about that in a little bit. And did you have a question for Kirsten?
Kirsten, I noticed on the recommendation for longer term pricing, it mentions twice all Portland area highways, and I assume that's 84, 405, 26, 217, but it's not written in that document, nor are those highlighted on the map. Did you mean to put all Portland area highways in that recommendation?
What we've heard is many of those highways have been mentioned, so we can reflect that if that's something the PAC wants to see reflected moving forward.
So if they move forward all Portland area highways, those 4 would be put into that paragraph, that recommendation, and they would be shown on the map?
So, Ann, we're going to come back to that as we step through these,
Great.
so we'll hold on to that
Thank
and
you.
make sure that we address that.
Okay.
Thanks. Roy.
Thank you. I'm not sure my question's to you, but more to our co-chairs. In one of the process questions, we're talking about a first milestone, a longer-term process, and I know the OTC didn't generate this particular body of work. It was the legislature, and I know talking with a number of members, it depends on who you talk to, what they thought was going to happen and what this all really means. We also have been doing dialogue with our congressional delegation. As some of you know, some of them are very anti-tolling, and really we're not going to move them at all. Others are open, but to have all kinds of caveats. So you talk about minority reports in this process. You discuss this ongoing process, but it might be helpful up front to know what, if anything, the OTC has talked about, what, if anything, you think is going to happen after this meeting, which is the end of this PAC today, so that we know going away today whether or not our minority reports, if we have one, goes directly to the state legislature, goes directly to our congressional delegation, of course involving conversations with you as well.
Yes.
Can I step in a little? Just to share with you a little bit about why this is presented in the way it is and why the meeting is structured in the way it is. It's just to help make the most use of this time. And so what we've captured in the summary comment, the questions in particular, are those things where we think that there is a large group, an opportunity for a larger group position. It may be opposed, we haven't actually taken a vote, but we're trying to capture those large themes, but still preserving the opportunity for, I'm calling it the highest common denominator, right? It's not the lowest common denominator. This is the highest common denominator that the group can take a position on, making the use of our limited time today so that we can provide that input to the Oregon Transportation Commission. But without losing your individual voice, providing that opportunity for the letters. We'll be going back and presenting this to the OTC July 12th. And that'll really be an opportunity for them to hear the PAC's recommendation as captured here as best we can, as well as public input. And then going back with and asking them for direction in August. So then that puts us on that timeline to go submit, follow the legislative direction by the end of this year for that proposal to the Federal Highway Administration. So many of the questions that have been raised, including some of the ones we heard about diversion and which of the freeways would be included in a larger study, are things that can be addressed, but until we find out what we're moving forward with, once we know what there's an interest in moving forward, then we can start diving in a little bit more to the most, to refining that level of analysis for diversion. What are the questions and what are the main concerns? So that's why it's structured in this way. I'm not sure if that really gets to your question, but I just wanted to say that's why we are asking you to answer specific questions, and if the conversation goes a different way, that's okay. It's just that we have until 12. We had a charter, and then we had these other topics.
Rory, I ultimately, again, we're not looking for consensus. I think we're trying to get as broad of a learning as possible. We will have to move forward consistent with the legislation, and I think what comes out of this process will go to both the legislature and to the commission. The commission will have, I think, a deeper discussion which may or may not embrace everything that comes out of this. But I think we certainly want to be sensitive and consider minority points of view and don't necessarily we're not necessarily looking for consensus here. I think we're just really looking to get the broadest perspective of points of view and concerns as possible.
If I could just say one thing, Sean. I'm not saying we have a minority position. You just keep referring to the process as being longer term, and I don't know what that means. And so I thought it might be helpful to clarify for all of us what that means.
Yeah, well, I think this particular process is intended to just really get points of view from major stakeholders that would be impacted by this, and to allow the public, even though their segments have been small, but to input and to submit arguments that just allow us to get smarter on what this could look like, or if it'll work, and to try to mitigate the unintended consequences. But I think it's really for us to just get smart, and I think hopefully we'll come away with a process that embraces a significant body of consensus and points of view. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But and I don't want to prejudice the outcome, but it's really just to inform the commission so that we can make a decision with the greatest amount of information possible.
Paul.
Thank you. So I appreciate Commissioner Holleran's clarification on that point. Another, that it's really about points of view that we're trying to extrapolate out of our work here. I believe there's a little bit of confusion, it seems, reading by some of the letters that have been submitted and some of the comments that have been made over this series and even recently about how, this process was predicated, or the ops were predicated on that capacity, or that third lanes, those bottlenecks being repaired, right, that they be solved. And that the basis for a lot of this analysis was the bottleneck I-205 at Rose Quarter would be eliminated or rectified. However, as we know, option E is a means to fund that. From reading one of the letters, and I approached Councilor Dirksen with Metro this morning, and they wrote their letter on the premise that it would be funded. And it wouldn't be funded with tolling, as I understand it. And if I'm wrong, I just want to apologize up front to Councilor Dirksen, but I believe that's what he said. However, our legislator has been met twice in Salem, and they have voiced individually and somewhat collectively
Paul, can I ask just a question? Is this a better conversation to have when we actually get into discussing the elements?
Well, I think it's actually more about clarification as to, I think we all need to understand, and that the point I was trying to make, let me finish that, and that is that my earlier comment, that they are relying upon the tolling to pay for these improvements, right, the capacity improvements. So my question is, going forward in today, as we go through the process, which is it? How is it going to be funded? Because if we're supposed to input and give our points of view, and it's predicated on a misunderstanding of how it's going to be funded, we're hearing two different things here.
Well, we haven't made that decision yet. The legislation makes it clear that a trust fund will be established to collect the revenue that would be collected from congestion pricing and tolling. It does not dictate an outcome of how that is there. Look, we obviously have a massive volume of infrastructure needs in this area, and a significant shortfall in revenue. While not prejudicing the future decision of the commission, I cannot imagine we'd come to a point where we think that the revenue collected should be used for anything other than reinvesting in the system. But we haven't made that decision yet, and it's not part of the process. This body's free to recommend whatever it wants, and I think the OTC will give it due consideration.
And I also think that since we're in this process and the PAC's recommendation is going to be very important for the commission moving forward, that it looks like there are some areas on these whiteboards over here that will help us kind of get to those next steps in terms of recommendation, which I think will highlight some of those capacity questions.
Okay, thanks. Kirsten, did you finish up, or? You're done? Okay, all right. Good, well, that brings us right to, and thanks everybody for your questions, and thanks Kirsten for the overview. That brings us right to the discussion about what's actually in the draft. There's a lot to discuss, as you've seen by the way the report is organized. There are some key questions that we want to be sure to discuss today. As Judith said, it's a way to organize the discussion and in a way check in on did we hear correctly, did we reflect correctly in this draft what we've been hearing and synthesize it properly. So there's a lot to talk about. I am going to ask everybody to be as brief as you can and to the point. So if you're thinking about a question, think about making it as clear and concise as you can, so that I want to make sure we have time to get to each of these sections. And also, just process-wise, I want to be sure and hear from all of you. So if you're being silent, don't be surprised if I ask you what you're thinking. So just be ready for that. I get very little power, but one of them is I get to call on whoever I want. So, you know, I got to exercise my power, right? Okay, so let me talk about how we are thinking about walking through this. And as you can see, Emma is posted over on the wall with all these lovely little check boxes. Again, the way we organize this discussion is on the 6 questions that are contained in the draft report. And just to make life even easier for you all, we consolidated the 6 questions into one sheet. Thank you. If you could start them that way. I have one. Thank you. And so we're going to walk through these. And as we discuss each of these questions, as the discussion wraps up, depending on where the discussion went, I will ask the question of all of you about the specific question that we're talking about. And I'm going to ask you if you support what is in the recommendation, the draft recommendation, if you don't support it but you can accept it, or if you oppose it. And I'm going to do that by a show of hands, and all we're going to do, we're proposing for the report, is to reflect in the body of the report what this outcome is. How many members support the recommendation, how many members can accept it, and how many members oppose it. And accepting means, in the language of this kind of discussion, I can go along with it, I won't fight against it, but I'm not saying I love it. I don't support it. Oppose means I cannot live with this. I do not approve of this in any way. So that's the support, the accept, and the oppose. And again, I'm not proposing that we're going to identify who picks whichever response they want. I'm going to count them. Emma's going to reflect the numbers. One of the reasons for you to have the opportunity to put your own letters in as the concluding part of the report is that if there's one of these questions that you feel very strongly about, whether it's support or oppose, that is your option and your opportunity to own it, talk about it, and say whatever you wish to say about it. So that's how we're going to move through this. And again, we're trying to make sure that these recommendations capture what we've heard from all of you, and we'll see where this takes us. So I'm going to, again, move on to the first, let's see, thank you. The first section, and the first the first question has to do with mitigation priorities. And again, up on the slide is what briefly what the recommendation says. You have the report in front of you. We're talking about section 2.2, which starts on page 3. Yes, Ann?
Penny, all that extra white space, do we go and write our but statements, or does Emma write all of our?
We're going to be capturing the discussion.
Okay,
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry I didn't make that clear.
Penny, and maybe we can clarify to how those comments will be reflected in the report that will go to the OTC.
Yes, I'm not proposing that every comment that's up there is going to be included in the recommendation. However, I think what we would like as a group is if ideas are suggested up here that need to be put in along with that, as a group I'll say, shall we include those? And so you're building this as we go. So I'm looking to you as to what should be included in this recommendation. We gave you the basic, but how it gets built out, recognizing that we have captured a lot of the sentiments in the summaries, and those are all going to be attachments, appendices to the report. Yes, Garrett.
Just before we get to section 2.2, in 2.1, under objectives and performance, it says that travel speeds and travel times will likely be primary metrics. And I know we're not getting an opportunity to vote or engage on that question, but the lack of identifying public transportation or public transit utilization as one of the primary metrics strikes me as an oversight that should be addressed. And that's sort of prior to the voting beginning, so I wanted to acknowledge that I think public transportation utilization should be a primary metric of success of the program.
Thanks. Judith?
Yeah, so I'll have to take a look. I was simply trying to capture what is likely to be required under federal policy guidelines. Let me just take a look and do a little better job of identifying what they would likely be required for that.
Okay, great. So again, mitigation priorities. What we heard was, as Kirsten went over, the improved public transportation, the special provisions for environmental justice, and the diversion strategies are the key priorities that you said needed to be called out. Did we get them right?
Can I ask one question?
Go ahead.
I like the word transportation modes instead of options. Are they synonymous terms? When we normally talk about transportation systems, we're talking about various modes, bike, bed, everything. Is that what options means? If it is, then I'm fine. But I don't know what it means by transportation options.
Right. Judith or Kirsten, do you want to address that? Either one of you.
We've often said transit, and it was requested that we be more specific to be inclusive of van pooling and carpooling. And so that's probably some of what we were thinking at that time. Park has his car that might mention that. That's generally, it's just about knowing that in different areas, different options are more viable. And so
it's not all modes.
It's not really all inclusive or exclusive necessarily at this point.
Park?
In the section about improved public transportation and other transportation options, it says carpool / ride share. And a few years ago that would have been fine with me, but Uber and Lyft have kind of taken over the ride share term, and I don't think that's what we mean. So I would replace ride share with van pools.
Okay, let's check on that. That's changing the language in the report. Do others have thoughts about that or any concerns with that? And Ann, are you up on that or something else? Okay, I'll wait. I'll hold on. Craig, are you up on that?
I'm okay with the comment that he made. When I hear ride share, I don't think of Uber and Lyft because there's another term that's used for that. But I don't know how other people around the table feel, but that's not what my comment's about.
Okay, all right. So any objection to replacing ride share? I can't remember what he said. What was it? Van share. Van. Yeah. Okay. Emma got it, right? You got it. Okay. All right. Sounds like that's okay. A good change. All right. I'm not sure which of you went up first, but I'm going to go to Craig.
Thank you. Comments on mitigation strategies, particularly around transportation or transit. We're pleased to see the recommendation call this out so clearly. We know that in order to provide people, we need to provide people with viable options if we're going to consider congestion pricing as a mitigation strategy for congestion. But given that, we feel that we need to take it one step further in the language, and transit access shouldn't just be a mitigation factor, but should be part of the program itself. That it has to be an integral part of the process. If ODOT studies pricing without increased transit access as part of the program, ODOT's analysis will demonstrate only what we already know, and that's hard to price people for something when you can't provide them with other options. So to truly understand how a program would work, we need to include increased transit access from the very beginning. With regard to the special provisions for certain populations, we're in total agreement with that. Would like to talk about.
Can I stop you?
Sure.
Let's address that first point first.
Just the transit?
Right,
yes.
yeah. As I was listening, I was wondering if that was covered in the other suggestions, input on other topics, but then as I listened, I'm not sure that it's the same thing.
Well, because we don't think that transit should be considered a mitigation strategy separately from the program, that if congestion pricing is going to be imposed, that the improved transit access must already be in place at the time of imposition, not considered as a mitigation strategy at some other time.
So let me ask the rest of the group, how do you react to that? How do you respond to that thought? Yeah, Paul.
Well, from Clackamas County standpoint, that 14-mile stretch between Sunnyside area and Wilsonville, I think it's imperative that transit alternatives be in place before tolling is implemented along that section.
So it sounds like you're in agreement with this thought. You were up and then you went down?
So I don't think we have our representatives from the EJ communities here today at this meeting, but I think that I think they feel hesitation related to a process when, and I would agree, when it's not brought in as early as possible in the analysis. So what we're looking for is you bake it in advance. You bring all of those options to the table in advance and really maximize them and make sure both during the process that we're developing whatever the structure will be for the program, and that it's there early and thought of early in the process, and that indeed, as was just mentioned, that you've got the options out there at the start.
And that the analysis is done based on assuming those options are in place.
Right.
That's what you were saying, right,
Yes.
Craig? Okay. Yes, Matt, and welcome to the table, Matt.
Thank you, Peggy. Yes, the city of Portland strongly supports that, and to kind of maybe bring it into a little bit of transportation dorkiness, we should model above and beyond what's already in the 2027 RTP. So any transit should be above what's already in there because we're adding a new system.
So I guess, Jessica.
Thanks, Penny. I just wanted to add my support to that comment. I think that if we're really talking about choices and getting people options for making this be successful, we need to have transit baked into the plan of what's going to happen there, what's going to happen with it.
Okay, Garrett?
Strongly support Metro Councilor Dirkson's comments on how we integrate transit into this process. Would like to see it as a foundational element of the program.
Okay, so and I'm going to try and repeat this back, and Kirsten's going to help me if I didn't get this right, because I'm not a content person. But I think what I heard, and I want to test this assumption, is that you would actually take it out of mitigation and make it a clarification or a condition of any of these concepts. Is that what you're proposing?
I don't know that it needs to be taken out of that portion of it. It can still be referred to as a mitigation strategy, but it's not a separate issue. It's part of the program, and just the language needs to reflect that.
Okay, and I think Judith has a thought.
We can capture that language.
You got it. Okay, and so it looks like there's a lot of agreement. Did anybody oppose that? Paul?
I just want to clarify. I think there are sections right now of the interstates where there is adequate transit to do, whether it's pilot or implement part of it. I just want to make sure that sections where there are no alternatives, and there is no transit currently, that it not be implemented until then.
Okay, so noted in terms of the language that gets developed. Ryan?
I guess the thing that I would add is I'm not sure that the other two aren't exactly the same. And I think we're getting a little bit sideways in terms of where we're going with this and making sure. I think the idea is if you are moving forward with the strategy, you need to make sure you're addressing all three of these before it gets implemented. And I think our planning and processes need to make sure that they are addressing each of these things and making sure that that the program incorporates a variety of mitigation strategies, including transit, and making sure that it's sufficient to address the needs at the time. And so I might say, you want to make sure all of our priority mitigation strategies are part of that development of the program and are being implemented at the time of tolling.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Anybody have any concerns with that? All right. I think Emma's been capturing that. Look at her frantically writing. Judith has been capturing it, and Judith is nodding her head. So I think we are there. Ryan, did you have something to add? No. Okay. All right. And then That was part one. So, Craig, part two. Sorry. Oh, wait. Jessica, are you still up on this one?
Yeah, sorry, I just had one. I mean, I agree with what Brian's saying because I think all of these are important. I just think that maybe we need to state it stronger in the report than how it's currently laid out. That these are essentials, really, not just.
So strengthen that reference.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think everybody would agree to that. Okay. All right. Part two, Craig.
I have a comment about the diversion strategy as a mitigation. Obviously, bad mitigation is a negative that we want to address and consider ways to mitigate that. But there are times when, for instance, you would like to divert local trips from freeways to local streets or local arterials. You want to divert people by giving them a different option to use transit instead. So some diversion is not bad. We expect some diversion. But because we expect, for instance, that local trips will be diverted from the freeways, we would encourage that, which would reduce congestion on the freeways. That's going to impact the term in the recommendation refers to parallel arterials. I'm not sure parallel is the correct one to use. Impacted arterials, because they're not necessarily going to be parallel per se. But because we anticipate that there will be impact on those that we recognize and don't want to oppose, that means that improvements to those arterials that we anticipate will be impacted, in particularly safety improvements, those need to be considered as part of the program as well so that those are prepared to accept those diversion trips that we're going to see from the freeways. So I think that I would suggest that adding improvements to arterials, safety improvements to arterials, is another one of the things that needs to be achieved when the program is imposed.
Thoughts on that? Anyone have any problems with that? Roy?
Yeah, I do. Craig, that's, as you know, that's way, way, way too broad. I mean, arterials could be a massive amount of activities, and I think from Washington County standpoint, and I've talked with Clackamas County, I think they're the same.
Roy, is your mic on?
It is. I probably am not talking into it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
What I said was arterials is way, way too broad. The amount of income that may be derived from tolling is going to be finite. It's not huge. We need to fix the bottlenecks on 205 and the Rose Quarter. Those are priorities for us. I'm concerned about getting too far afield. I certainly don't have any problem with the mitigation. We don't have any problems with some arterials, but to carte blanche it is maybe broader. So I think you can understand that.
I do.
Yeah.
So is there a way to get your concept in but not broaden it quite that?
Well, I think it's just recognizing that safety improvement is an improvements to arterials that will be impacted by diversion. That needs to be given a priority consideration.
Okay.
For local trips, correct.
For local trips.
Yeah.
Park?
Yeah, I heard you say early on, drop parallel and replace it with impacted.
Yes.
Everybody all right with that? Everybody?
Well, actually, I'm kind of fond of the word parallel. So can it be included as well and/or?
Sure.
Because I think it's imperative on that section of 205. I keep pointing out there is nothing really other than something ideally parallel.
Okay, your fondness is noted, and we've adapted to that. Okay, are we all right with that then? No concerns? And you have what you needed, Emma? You got it? Okay, and I'm not seeing any concerns over here from the, okay, all right. Okay, anything else on mitigation priorities? Ann?
As we look at the second mitigation strategy, we appreciate the second line there that reads, regardless of state of residence. We were wondering if the PAC would consider using the phrase entire regional bi-state system. The roadmap points out regional planning. It also points out system design, and the phrase the entire regional bi-state system would work with all of these, reminding folks that CTRAN right now is the only provider of interstate transit right now. And that is the first question.
So let me just make me clear where you're proposing this change. So you're saying instead of saying regardless of state of residence?
No, I think I would throw it up in the paragraph before it actually talks about draft recommended mitigation strategies.
Okay.
That these mitigation strategies would be for the entire regional bi-state system.
Okay, thoughts about that? Thank you for the clarification. Any thoughts about that? Any concerns? You okay, all right. It doesn't seem like that's a problem to anybody.
The second piece, Penny, is that with some of these, we may have some regulatory barriers that need to be remedied. So I don't know where that goes in there, but it needs to be pointed out that moving across metro, moving across the state, moving across the counties, there may be some legislation or some regulation barriers that need to be clarified. So I would think somewhere in here it needs to be pointed out that we may need to some regulatory barriers remedied.
Thoughts about that? Anyone have any concerns with that? And I think the writers can figure out where to put that in. Yeah. You're nodding? Okay. I'm taking her nod as a yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Anything else on the mitigation priorities? All right, then here's what I'm going to do. Given the changes that we discussed, as Emma has captured over there, as the writing team has nodded that they can make those changes, the question is, with those changes, do PAC members support a recommendation to the OTC that identifies these priorities for mitigation strategies that should be more fully developed as part of congestion pricing? This is where I'm going to ask, do you support this recommendation? And if you do, please put your hand up high so I can count accurately. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 support. How about accept? 1, 2, 3. Okay? And oppose? Looks like 0. I want to validate that. I don't see anybody's hands. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you very much. That was the first question. Now, we move on to the actual concepts. And I know they're all going to go exactly as smoothly. All these questions are going to go exactly that smoothly because now you see how it's done, right? Okay. All right. So, thank you. And so you have up here on the slide so everyone can see, we're now moving on to the second set of questions, and this is referring to section 2.3, which starts on page 2-5 of the report, and I have so many things open in front of me now, I'm losing myself. So these are, there are 2 questions here that we want to take, but first I want to open up comments or thoughts about these 2 questions. The advancing pricing projects on both I-5 and I-205, this has to do with the balanced approach, and then the second part is advancing the 2-tier approach, starting smaller pilots and then going to larger scale. And so I'm not sure which order, but Pam, we haven't heard from you yet, so I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Penny. I've spent the last couple of weeks with Judith Gray more than I have with my own family, but, and it was a wonderful experience. But and at the Westside Economic Alliance transportation meeting, we had a very interesting discussion. But one of the questions came up that I would like to have addressed here, and that is, does B and E, the concepts B and E combined, do they provide enough information to test the system efficiently? That was a big concern from that transportation group. So that's one question that we would have. The other thing that our committee felt very strongly about and that I heard throughout Washington County is that capacity is the #1 issue that they would like to address, increasing capacity. Judith, can you answer that question?
We were going to call David Ungama up to the table to address that first question about the 2 different pricing concepts on.
And while
together.
David's getting settled, I want to back up for just a second. I would ask you, Emma, to change the vote, not voting, but change the preferences up there to 15 for support, because I forgot that we have input from Curtis, who's not here, and his response was support on the first question. So I will remember to include his responses as we move forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As I understood, the question, the first part of the question was, would these two concepts, Concept B and modified Concept E, provide enough information about how effective congestion pricing would be so that it informs whether the region should move to a larger scale deployment and implementation? And the answer is yes, for a variety of different reasons. The first, as it pertains to Concept B, is very much oriented towards congestion pricing as a traffic mitigation strategy. So there are a substantial amount of trips that are occurring through this segment, as well as a fairly constrained environment whereby the benefits of congestion pricing would become apparent in a relatively short period of time after implementation and deployment. It is typical that a congestion pricing project takes about 2 to 3 years of what's known as a ramp-up period, whereby there's a substantial level of response from the part of the population. Traffic kind of filters out as to who takes a trip when, how they're going to make different changes in terms of routing decisions or time of day decisions or modal decisions. And within that amount of time, then you get a pattern that then is quite a bit sustainable. We anticipate the same, if not a shortened period of time for evaluation for Concept B. So it could be even less than 3 years before we get to that stabilization point. On modified Concept E, there is a revenue component to that for construction purposes. And in that situation, then, we have the benefit of not only understanding the congestion reduction benefits on I-205, the diversion impact specifically within the Oregon City, West Linn area, as well as finally the contribution of travelers to the payment of funds for the construction of the Abernathy Bridge as well as for the third lane. And so between those two, we have resolved the broad question that was posed by the legislature in HB 2017 as to how congestion pricing could be utilized as both a traffic congestion reduction measure as well as a revenue generation measure.
So one more question. Are you saying then that the efficiencies either recognized or not recognized from B and E can be extrapolated to the entire system? Yes.
So certainly there is enough statistical evidence then that would be generated from both those two that would then provide for information as to how that would populate out for congestion pricing across the broad system. Obviously, local context means a lot. In the case of Concept E, for example, it's a very constrained environment where the route alternatives are very, very few. In other segments of I-5 or 205 or potentially any of the other freeway corridors, there may be more routing options. So as a result, understanding that context will be important as we extrapolate data for information about the broader system.
And that I will note, thank you, Pam, that was the same question that Curtis asked in his response to the second question. Ann?
So would there be any preference to doing the Abernathy prior to the MODA Center? Would there be any benefit of doing one pilot before the other pilot, or is it still is the recommendation to do both at the same time?
You want David to continue?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address. So both of these projects have an independent value about them. So part of the reason that our team feels strongly about these two concepts as being part of the initial recommendation is that they have a benefit immediately and independent of each other. So you could do Concept B and have a benefit. You could do Concept E and have a benefit. As to the timing of the two, Concept B requires a greater level of engagement with the Federal Highway Administration and U.S. Department of Transportation due to the value pricing program that authorization would need to proceed under. That can take some time, and it is a very political process. The Concept E may require the same process, or it may be available for clearance under Section 129 of the U.S. Code, in which case the approval process may be a little bit simplified, but the construction time frame is going to extend, into a greater amount of time. There's construction-related effects that just frankly take more time than would be the relatively minimal construction that would be necessary to make Concept B happen. So from a timing perspective, they may both really be deployed at the same time just because of how that timing works out in terms of the approval process. But they do have, as I mentioned, independent reasons for existence and independent reasons for recommendation. So one could proceed without the other.
Paul?
So this is where maybe I can't go very much farther in an agreement. So because of the severe concerns of diversion we're experiencing today as a result of congestion through the Oregon City Westland area, I have real concerns about E. You want to support that, but the way the question is worded, I can't support it the way it's worded, because basically it suggests that go forward on these pilot projects. My issue with diversion is we haven't had the analysis or the study or any solutions or proposal of solutions that would actually mitigate or cure some of not only the existing diversion but the anticipated diversion as a result of the tolling. So therefore, my discomfort, and as I expressed, maybe with the concept of not tolling anything until there's alternatives in place, I haven't even seen a suggestion of how that would even be accomplished. So that's where my reservation is. And for example, E, or the concept of pilot projects, I think is good. I support the concept of pilot projects, but it would be ideally done where there already is parallel transportation. For example, 205 north of Sunnyside has parallel transit options, both light rail and bus, as does Interstate 5 in that area. There is no alternative in that other section, so that's where my reservation is.
Okay, thanks. Ryan?
I guess I'm looking for a little bit of clarity here and making sure that we're all thinking the same thing. Because what I just heard Commissioner Savas say is, tomorrow we're going to flip the switch and advance both of these forward, and we're done. We've stopped talking about it. My understanding of what this process is that we're advancing these two ideas on for additional analysis, additional consideration by the OTC, and certainly additional study to answer a broad range of questions related to diversion, exactly where the tolling endpoints would be, and other things. So is my understanding correct?
That's correct, and if it's helpful for the PAC, we can flip back to the roadmap and have David talk about some of the next steps that will come post-December. If that's something that would be useful.
So do we need to clarify that for you, Commissioner? And in this particular question that just says the recommendation to the OTC advance these pilot projects on for additional analysis and consideration.
Further study. Add the words for further study, and okay. I could buy into that.
And in fact, just to clarify, the issue we talked about a minute ago that had the 3 priority mitigation topics of diversion, safety, and environmental justice populations, the purpose of, we moved that to the front because we knew that's what we had heard was the concern. And so that's a condition of these next concepts. So that's like Ryan is saying.
But the clarification that I think was just suggested was to add in question 1, under this section, a recommendation that advances pricing projects for further study on both I-5 and I-205. Thoughts about that? I see both of you are up on this. Marion? Or, yep, go ahead.
It's kind of a different
issue. Okay, then let's hold that. So any thoughts about adding that phrase? Any concerns with that?
The phrase is here. It's the first sentence of section 2.3. The draft recommendation regarding pricing concepts identifies pricing programs that warrant further traffic revenue and environmental analysis, and on and on. So that's overriding.
Well, then maybe at least put it in parentheses under the question, but I want it included if I'm going to support it.
In some cases, I don't think duplication is a bad thing. Okay, so if we're all okay with that, then I will move on. Marion and then Jane.
Thanks. Particularly
Janet,
given the conversation we just had that all this is going on with further study, and thinking about some of the public comment we heard about the cutoff on the I-5 area at Going. I recall, maybe I'm misremembering from the last meeting, that we did have some discussion about whether that was the right location. And maybe it's, since this is all about further study, maybe it's simply adding the blue hashtags like on the 205 so that we can look at where the right part on the north end of I-5 is for this.
And that is what we had heard also from the PAC in terms of the termini for concept B, and we can certainly reflect that because that was the intent, but it maybe is not reflected in the graphic.
Okay, thanks.
Jana, and sorry for massacring names. I just do it all the time.
Thank you. I didn't want to be Jane today, so I
Okay,
appreciate
I don't blame
that.
you.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that we did an independent study a couple of years ago on freight bottlenecks nationally, and that section in the Rose Quarter was number 60 in the list of 100 top freight bottlenecks nationally. So our concern with looking at tolling, if you just did one of the freeways or the other, is that you would divert enough traffic, it would actually make the situation worse for us instead of better today. So I think our sense is that you need to do both in order to manage the traffic flow and understand the impacts of that. So we would be supportive of doing them together rather than just trying one here and then moving on to the other network. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see what order. Oh. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm gonna start. Yeah, Matt.
Thank you. So the City of Portland definitely strongly supports congestion pricing on I-5 and 205. We would like, of course, to see it taken further in the near term, continue to study all of the facilities on both those, but to build a little bit on what Marion said and what public comment from the Overlook neighborhood about the starting and end points of the Section B. I obviously wasn't here, but my understanding, and staff has let me know, that there was a technical memo that had something about they would be re-examine the beginning and end, and that seems to have disappeared in this current, and we'd like to see that put back in.
Any problems with that? Oops.
All right, well, to piggyback on what Jana said a couple moments ago, AAA, of course, supports the notion of tolling and realizes that it's a tool that we have to consider when it comes to transportation funding. We also believe that when tolls are utilized, reasonable alternative toll-free routes and/or lanes should always be available. And of course, that is very important to our discussion about diversion. So we would certainly like to look at what options would be available without creating many more bottlenecks on some of the surface streets.
Whatever we do to show that we're still studying the north end of the I-5, we should include at the south end too, that we're looking at both.
In terms of termini, you mean?
Yeah, just to not indicate that we're solid on Multnomah Boulevard, but we're looking at more options at the other end. I think we're looking at options on both ends.
Other thoughts? Are you still up, Marie? Do you want to put your? Thank you. Yeah, no worries. Yes. Sorry, I didn't see you down there, Eileen.
I just put it up.
Okay.
I just wanted to piggyback on Marie's comment and mitigate or extra capacity or a free lane that AAA supports. That the only option on B, on the north end of I-5, there are no extra lanes. You're going to be tolling all of those lanes. Therefore, the only way that people are going to get off, the only way that they're going to get to a different lane that isn't tolled is to get off of the freeway. So this does not provide the opportunity that the AAA is saying that they would like to have, because there is no general purpose lane.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Other thoughts, questions, comments about this next question? It's a good thing you put 2 sheets up for each one, Emma, and that you write small. Okay, so what I heard, let me make sure I got any changes actually that were agreed to. What I heard on this one was to add, Emma, why don't you read them, because I can't read them from here.
Sure. So we had a couple questions about whether it provides enough to test the system. The technical team answered yes. Preference to do one pilot before the other. The technical team, correct me if I got this wrong, David, is they are independent value and benefit based on the process that would have to go through for approval. They may be deployed simultaneously due to that process. Then the big addition was to add for further study at the conclusion of the question, and there was broad support for adding that. And then we had discussion about clarifying that the termini of both concepts on either corridor would be further analyzed, further explored, that the show that, and that would apply both to the north and south terminus.
Okay, great, thanks. Pam?
One more question. When you're looking at both of the recommendations in context, so I know we're going to vote on the first part here, but in looking at both of them, is this an either-or situation, or can you vote thumbs up on both? That's one piece of this. And then secondarily, I thought that we were looking at the B&E option and then looking at a complete system option, but it doesn't appear that way in the verbiage here, in that it indicates that it advances a two-tier approach.
Help me understand that.
So this appears to me on the second question to be much more phased in than going with the entire system at once.
Judith, did you want to?
Sure. This is what we were trying to capture here is they're actually principles. And one principle was, is there general support that we should be looking at a pricing concept on both I-5 and 205? And that actually is reflected either in the tiered approach for the initial pilot as well as in the larger concept. So it's sort of a principle to sort of move us to the next question. And the next question is, this phased approach that the consultant is recommending, and that's one where I know I've heard other views, and so that's there for your discussion and to capture the position. But we thought it made some sense because whether you look to the tiered approach with an initial pilot implementation or a bigger approach going all in up front, it still is captured in that principle of both freeways. So we just tried to organize it that way. Does that make sense, at least in why it's presented this way?
So if we're ready to just go to the first question, and it doesn't tell you how you have to respond on the second question. Oh, Ann, do you have a question? You look puzzled.
Well, I thought I knew what we were voting on, but now I'm not so sure. So this first one is recommended initial pricing pilot, and it's the B with a modified E. And then,
well, it's actually if I can, it's just it says, it doesn't say exactly that. It says both I-5 and I-205. It isn't terribly specific, but what it addresses is this, as Judith said, the principle of doing something on both freeways. That's really what we're after on this question, right?
Yeah, and in a way, if that's not the way that the group is able to weigh in, then we can be flexible about it. We were just trying, like I said, to kind of organize the discussion in a way that didn't become all, circular.
And if it shouldn't be a principle, if it should be a specific, as you just stated, then let's make it that.
And I think as I look on 2-6, that's what that top half of the page is, isn't it? It talks about B and modified E.
Correct.
So is it, I see cards going up, is it the will of the group that instead of having this be a principal question, that this is really a specific question? Do you support a recommendation that advances, given the caveats that have been written up there, advances pricing projects on both I-5 and so B and modified E? Is that what I'm hearing that it should say? Yes, yes. Does anybody disagree with that? Garrett? Okay.
I appreciate the way the questions are written. The way the questions are currently written, it will be helpful for me to express a policy preference around basically preferring concept C and not preferring the phased approach. I feel as though that's clear based on the way the questions have been asked.
Okay, yes, Matt?
Yeah, Garrick, that helps, and I was trying to explain it. So the question is broad enough that the City of Portland could support that first question because we'd like to see it, the entire I-5 and 205. But the question is, do you want to see it on both? And we do. The second piece, we will accept but not support because we want to see the entire thing and not that. Does that make sense?
I understand that the way the question is asked matters and how you respond to it is what I'm hearing. Yes, exactly. And so what I'm wondering is if well, I'm not going to propose that quite yet. I'm going to take these other cards and see if somebody else has my thought. Pam, are you still up?
The reason the reason I raised the question is I went back to our committee and asked, do you want B and E or do you want C? And we were actually, and the reason I asked the question about can we vote for both is that the committee was evenly split. So the feedback that I got was about one decision versus the other decision. That's why I'm asking how the question's asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ryan.
So I'm trying to help us figure a way forward through this, and what I was hearing the group that chatted yes saying is they would like to be able to advance or have a conversation about do they support the 2 pilot projects, and then a conversation about do they support C, and maybe we could cover the principle that Garrick mentioned in terms of do we think we ought to do both under additional stakeholder or additional policy considerations from the group. Was that what it's called? And so that would give us the opportunity to have this question about do you support tolling on both versus and separating it from the project proposals that are being, and I think that is a good reason is what Pam described, which is that was sort of what they went back to their communities with in terms of asking the question, do you support these 2 proposals? Do you support C? And then we can have a separate thing of what the committee wants to weigh in on in terms of do you think you ought to do both or one?
And I think it's just a question of whether to put it in, because I was going to ask, recommend the same thing, adding a 3rd question, but where you put it, I think, is the difference. But adding a 3rd question as to, in principle, and maybe that's exactly how it's stated, in principle, the committee recommends, I'm making this up as I go here, are you writing, Emma? Yeah. In principle, the committee recommends an approach that puts tolling on both freeways, both freeways, not one or the other. I mean, that's the principal question that I think Judith was proposing we get to. And then there's the question, then you get to the more specific questions. Do you support the B and modified E? Do you support C?
And I would propose asking your question later under the PAC input on other topics versus trying to do it before.
Okay. Everybody okay with that approach? All right. Bernie.
I'm not sure. I think what I'd like to see is the emphasis on C, that's our ultimate goal, is to get to that level of congestion pricing application in the region. And that these are interim steps on the way to that. So I was going to suggest that we just flip around the long term and the short term and say, long term, our ultimate strategy is to implement C. Knowing that it's difficult to go there in the first step, we agree that these first 2 pilots are a necessary step on the journey to that ultimate goal.
Thoughts about that? Paul, well, wait a minute. Let me see. Chris, you went up. Paul went up. Jenna, you go up for that? Yep. Okay. Chris?
So I would agree with Bernie, although I would suggest that that's not actually comprehensive because it's not looking at all the freeways in the system. I mean, there may be some design in the future that doesn't look exactly like that. What we want to see is a system across the region that really accurately manages demand so that that's a way of increasing capacity across the region in a way that's very cost effective for the taxpayer and the driver.
Paul?
Well, getting back to Bernie's point, I think that's how I was prepared to answer number 2. Because number 2, I think, basically, because it talked about phased implementation, assuming, again, the material below, the maps, or the drawings, that concept C was included in the section in question 2, but not in question 1 per se. So if that's still the case, I can support 1 as written, but not inferring that C is an automatic. Number 2 does that for me.
Okay. All right. I see the difference there. Jana?
Well, representing one of the major payers of this concept, I think I would have to say that what we would like to see is some success, and we'd like to see some implementation before we start supporting tolling the entire network. We'd like to see some capacity improvement. We'd like to see some deliverables. So I can't go there on the whole concept in theory without understanding how much benefit is going to come out of that. So I can support the B and E. I can potentially accept the C, maybe, but can't go. I think it needs to be clear that we are going to get some benefit and some capacity improvement and some investment in capacity improvement before we start talking about pricing everything.
So I think for question number one, we need to be very clear about what you're answering when you answer that question. And thank you, Pam, for bringing this subject up. I'm sorry, did I miss somebody? My little cameras here are blocking you, Jessica. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just going to start waving it around. I think that there's been a lot of good discussion, although I do feel we've kind of lost the clarity of exactly what we're voting on. I think I had better clarity before we started the discussion. So, I mean, I do think, though, it's important to vote on this right now when we're talking about the concepts to make the decision if we're going to be, what exact approach, and not push it off into a different section, because I think this is really the heart of what we're here to do, and that's all I wanted to say on that.
Okay, thanks, Jessica.
Just to make one other quick comment. Washington County would not agree to a system-wide implementation at this point until we see some results, and I think that Janice said that well. So we like the pilots. I still have great sympathy and empathy for our friends in Clark County, who, as Marie and I talked about the other night in Costco as we ran at each other, that they have no alternatives in C. And so I like the phase that we kind of see how it works before we start taxing our neighbors to the north with no benefits to them and no alternatives. They've got to come across those two bridges. So I like the B and the modified E, and we work towards C. If I had my druthers, we would do C, but I think we need to be sensitive to them.
Craig.
Metro strongly supports the idea of a pilot and evaluating the results of the pilot before we go to a general tolling concept.
I was just going to say the same thing, so the same as Councilor Dirksen. Let's start with B and E and then see how we're doing before we would put C into implementation.
So I think what I'm hearing is that Ryan, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, that's what I wanted to do, was say, I think we ought to be having a conversation. So then it sounds like what we ought to be doing next is, do we support advancing those two projects as a pilot? That's a question. The next question is, do we think long-term implementation of C ought to be done? And then if we want to move on to the policy question, we can talk about that under other things as recommended by the PAC.
Yeah, I was hearing that exactly the same thing with the clarification that number one includes B and modified E, and that it is as a pilot and it is a standalone. That is something that you answer that question, and then going on to number two is talking about the bigger system.
I think parentheses of that, what you just said, Penny, will do that.
So making sure it's very clear about that. Yes. Okay. All right. So is that everybody okay with that? If that's the question number one now, that it's right, you support B and a modified E, and it's on both I-5 and 205. It's as a pilot with, you want to see the results and so forth and so on, and full stop. That's what you're supporting or not supporting. Yes.
I guess I'm the one person who understood the questions as they were written before, and the way you're rewriting them, it seems to be forcing the choice on B and E in both. And I'm curious if that is the
I don't think that's the intent.
Okay.
No.
I'll keep tracking. Thanks.
Yeah, but if it gets there, let me know, because it's not what I'm intending. So, do we need to clarify the question in two before we call the question on number one, or should we just call the question on number one?
And Penny, I'm going to need you to repeat the wording.
Yeah.
All the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can't reach it to write it up there on the actual question, but so the question, as I understand it, for question one, do PAC members support a recommendation to the OTC that advances pricing projects B and modified E on both I-5 and I-205 as a pilot in order to test, and I don't know what the word exactly is, but to test the efficiency, effectiveness, and so forth of congestion pricing?
I think the words there might simplify that with the further study that we agreed on earlier.
And further study is in there as well, yes. So that's the question. Is everybody? And then the second question? We're going to do the first question first. Okay? So, with the question as stated, did you get that, Emma?
I think so. Okay, so.
And I can give it to you afterwards if, okay. Because I have it written in here. Okay. So for that first question, those who support, please raise your hand. Keep it up so I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And those who can accept. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those who oppose. 1, 2. Okay? And then let me see. I'm looking at what we got from Curtis, and he said, central to this is the ability to demonstrate to the public that value pricing is an effective way of reducing congestion. So yes, I'm sorry, make that a 10 in the support. Sorry. I just wanted to make sure that what he said went along with the way we asked the question. Pam.
Could I ask a question of Garrett so that I understand?
Sure.
Can you tell me why you voted no? Because I think it has something to do with the question itself, not the concept.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So my intention sitting at this table is to put a vote in support of concept C as the appropriate approach to addressing congestion given the cost and complexity of rolling out the program and my anticipated sort of benefits that people will experience. My concern with using a phased approach for B and modified E is that they inherent in them appear to have a project finance element driving their implementation. And what I would like to see is value pricing in the region set to manage demand with transparent policy and a variable price that, the price goes up and down based on demand. And so I'm concerned that B&E are project finance tools that may or may not ever lead us to C. So again, I want to put my support on the table for C, but not for the project finance of B&E.
Thank you, Garrett. Jana.
I think I'll reiterate a statement I made at one of the earlier meetings, and that is the Oregon Trucking Association's support for tolling at all is based on capacity improvements. So in terms of a financing option for capacity improvements, we are fine with that. If we're looking for tolling to support other kinds of programs, we are not in favor of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to, go ahead, Chris.
So it's interesting. I feel as though a lot of folks who've been involved in this committee don't actually see the value of congestion pricing as actually increasing capacity. That's exactly what it does, because right now we build roads based on peak period travel. We say there's so many people on the freeway at this time, let's add more lane space. What congestion pricing does by that variable toll is actually reduces the number of people on the road during peak period travel, gets the through traffic that we're looking for, that we thought we needed with increased road space, but we actually get it with the pricing. I totally agree that we need to do this in somewhat phases and prove that to the public, but as we heard from our consultants around the world, when things have been priced, first the public's like, no way, man, and then when they actually see the results, it totally flips, and people are like, this is the right way to manage our system. This is the cheapest way to get new capacity. So I agree with what Garrick said earlier. I think I've gotten completely confused by these questions. I also think that unless you use peak period pricing and you find that it's still congested, that's the signal from the drivers that we're like, okay, you might need to widen the capacity. What you do is you price first, and based on then an analytical way of deciding whether you need more capacity, then you add the new capacity. I'm for pricing first.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask what we need to do to question 2 to make sure it's asking the right question. So Pam, I'm going to go back to you because you raised the question to begin with. So what do you think the question is that we need to answer in question 2? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you're a good resource.
That's fine. When I went back to my community, what I went back with was an either-or question, B&E or C. So the assumption going in was that we supported the congestion pricing. The question was, would you go first with B&E or would you go first with C? That was the question that we asked. And what I ended up with in my group was a total split. That's why I will vote yes on both. But I'm just clarifying that was what I took away from our last meeting as the question to ask. So if I was confused, I apologize for that, but that's the direction I went.
And Garrick, I want to go to you if I can, because I think I heard you say earlier that doing the question that way was forcing us into an either or. So can you tell me what you think question should be?
I mean, I agree with Pam completely. My hope is that there was a way to test support for concept C. And again, I thought that was clear in the way the questions were written. It seems as though we've just pushed the second question up into the first, and I'll ask that if we find a way to, test the policy appetite for concept C, then the question would satisfy my needs.
So as we've put the question of the principled question about I-5 and I-205 into the other topics section, is there another question about C that would also go in there? And could you give me a thought about what that would be?
I don't know what the words are, but when I look at longer-term implementation here, I see an option that I would like to vote in support of. So if we can find a question that gets us there, that's my hope.
Okay, your job is to be thinking about that question.
So if I could jump in, the reason, again, we put those questions there to help the conversation, not to cause extra confusion. And I really feel like, so forget the question then, as it's written, if that's not helpful. We're trying to get a response to a particular recommendation on the table. So I really feel like I just don't want people to think there's like a pride of authorship on those questions. It's okay to
I don't think so. I'm going to go, I was looking over here, so I'm going to go around the table here. I'm going to go to Craig, and then, no, I know, Marion, yours went up first, and I'm going to go back to Craig.
Okay, we're spending a lot of time talking about the actual words in the question. To me, the question, you need a question that's relatively short that you can ask, but the question is really, the question is about, do you support the draft recommendation for long-term pricing program, which is a whole paragraph. And you could make the question the entire paragraph, I guess, but the whole paragraph says, if the initial pilot program is determined to be a success, broader regional implementation of congestion pricing is recommended. And then it specifically says concept C. So the question, the general question here is, do you support that recommendation that's in the recommendation? To me, that's what that question is asking.
That's a very good point. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, and it really does help. At least it helps me. Marion?
I was just going to say, to get to the points that everybody wants to make, it seems like there's three questions to me. The one that we just did, which is, making it really clear that there's these pilots moving forward to test. The second one would be support for advancing the broader concept of C and using the pilots to kind of test that out. But I think part of it needs to be built in that you're doing the pilots with that larger concept in mind, so that you're designing the system so that it's proving the larger point in a way that's positive or negative, however that turns out. And then the third question is just a standalone on C to get to some of the points that Garrick and others have made that just want to go, jump into the full concept. So it seems like there's kind of three questions that maybe then would address the different pieces that folks want to get on the record.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll keep that. I've got that written down. Ryan?
Yeah, Penny, I think to get at all of these and to answer it, because I think Marion's right on, is that there's a concept of you advance the pilots and you move on then and use those to advance towards a tiered approach, or you start with C. So the next question should be, do you want to start with C and skip the phased approach and just do C? And then the next question would be, if you don't want to do that, do you want to start with the pilots and then as working towards C? Does that meet everybody's? Does anyone have an objection to moving forward like that?
Bernie?
Well, I like the idea, Ryan, and that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Not to say that we jump to C and implement it first, but that the committee's recommendation is that that's what we're trying to get to, and the pilot projects are a way of testing whether there are, additional mitigations and off-ramps that need to be taken.
Thank you.
So
And
I think it's more the order in which they appear. I mean, as Judith points out, you have to ask the questions in chunks. If we flipped it around and said, does the committee really want to support the notion of recommending to OTC that option C is the direction that we ultimately want to go, and then ask but should we try some short-term test, pilots first? Then I think it would address that issue.
Go ahead, Ron.
And I think the third question gets at what you just asked, and I think the second question gets at what Garrick's asking, which are different things. And so that's why I was proposing we have the question, do we support moving forward with C first and just jumping in, or do we take a tiered approach with C as the ultimate vision in mind?
Okay, let me take the rest of these cards and then we'll sort this out. Yeah, Ann.
Two quick questions. C was just I-5 and 205, but on page 2.6 it talks about all of the Portland area highways, and that comes back to 84, 405, 26, and 217. Are we just talking I-5 and 205, or are we talking about all Portland area highways?
In the recommendation, it's C as a longer-term vision analyzed in the context of looking at other regional freeways.
So it's modified C. It's the old C+.
C+.
C+. Okay, which is not the same as a B-. The definition of comprehensive planning, please.
That is yet to be determined, and that's something that the PAC could provide recommendations on today or in letters to the OTC. We do know that there are certain steps that need to happen prior to implementation as shown on the roadmap. So that we do know, but the extent of the comprehensive planning has not been decided on to date, so that will be part of the future work.
Phil, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say because of that ambiguity, that helps me make my decision on the vote. Thank you.
Okay, all right, Phil?
It just seems like a just C scenario doesn't take into consideration much of the discussion that's been occurring, because a just C is tolling all lanes, I-5, 205, north to south.
Which I think is why Ann made the distinction sort of this, or between you came up with the C and the C+. Yeah, right, right. So here's what I think I've been hearing. We've already asked the first question about the pilots. Then, is there support for advancing a broader concept of C, doing the pilots with C in mind? It's kind of the first question. Do we start with C instead of starting with the pilots, or maybe that's the way to start with C, but we don't make that assumption. Do we just start pursuing C, not C+, but C, and remember C is I-5 and 205, okay? And then the third question is, do you want to use the pilots to get to this broader system-wide or regional C+ version?
So
did I hear those right?
I think what I heard, and of course some others are welcome to say they heard something else. I think I heard that the next question is, do you support moving forward with C first? And having a discussion about that. And then do you support C along with additional analysis, so the C+ additional analysis of other freeways, do you support that as a future vision? And those are the two questions.
Yes. So do we want to start with C is one of the questions we need to ask. Paul.
So Penny, I have a suggestion. Why don't we just answer number 2 and in parentheses put in B and E followed by C, because that's really what we're talking about. That's how number 2, I think I read number 2. And then let's ask a third question after we answer the second question about do we want to start with C. I think that'll bring clarity to, I think, what I'm hearing. So leave 2 worded as it is, except in parentheses put in the bringing in B and E, and
Yes.
then followed by C.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's, yeah. How do you like that question? So it's question 2, that says, do PAC members support a recommendation to the OTC that advances the two-tier approach, which starts with the two smaller pilot projects, B and E, followed by the larger scale phased implementation on I-5 and 205, which is C. Let's just answer that one, and then we'll get to the third. Okay? Everybody okay with that? Thank you, Paul. Everybody okay with that? Do I need to say it one more time? Yes. Okay. So the question would read, do PAC members support a recommendation to the OTC that advances the two-tier approach, shown in Figure 2-2, which starts with two smaller pilot projects, and in parens, I would put B and modified E, and is followed by a larger scale phased implementation on I-5 and I-205, and in parens, I would put concept C. Does that make sense? Did you get that, Emma? Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
So, and I apologize for jumping in late, right when everybody seems to be agreeing on the question, but my struggle is trying to represent those that have brought comments to us over the last week. Many of those comments have to do with why a two-tiered approach. One is if you really are invested in a strategy that has a pilot in place that says, let's test what the pilot would tell us, and then look at the results from that and then determine what the next steps are. And so then that would raise the question about kind of a broader system approach, not just I-5 and I-205. Again, trying to capture those things that I've heard, and this seems like the right time to input that. So one is, why just I-5 and I-205 if we're really looking at a congestion management approach? Why would they be isolated by themselves? The other is, without an understanding of what projects might be constructed as part of this, it's tough for them to weigh in and determine whether or not they see value there. So it seems as though they're weighing in ahead of time. And then without a definition of what success is, how do you vote on what is successful out of a process and then adapt to the next tier without knowing what the process will be for that? So those are some of the struggles that they're having in this acceptance model of moving forward with the tiered process. I understand the diligence associated with it. I completely understand the complexity of moving forward something like this. But without those questions being answered, I think it's really tough to say that a single vote as it relates to a pilot for B and E, when tied to C without some understanding of what those impacts could be, is tough for those on the Washington side to get to. And again, I don't want to speak for my counterparts here, but that's what I'm hearing.
Right, so let me turn that back to you, Chris, and say if we asked question 2, as I suggested the modification, and then question 3 was, and I don't have it right yet, but it's something like, do you want to proceed with the pilots to get the information on effectiveness and so forth with the aim of getting to broader implementation considering all Portland area highways? So this is where it's not just C, but it's the broader system-wide look.
I would say that there could be more acceptance of that if, again, the term that Ryan added earlier, which is the additional evaluation and then knowing what the process step is for the OTC to evaluate those things. So if it's an additional evaluation and supporting something going forward, I think that makes sense. I think the difficulty gets back to if it's just isolated to I-5 and I-205.
Right.
It feels, and again, I'm reciting what we've been hearing over the last week, but as you can imagine, our phones have been kind of lit up over the last week.
So I think with the way that we're approaching these two last questions, I think they get to that either or, those two different ways. The one that you say you don't seem to be hearing support for, but potentially for the other one. So let me try that third one again, because I want to make sure we get both of these questions right. And you can help me if there's somebody has, as always, better wording than I do. But essentially, we keep question 2, as Paul suggested, saying that, it's B and E followed by C, which is I-5 and 205. And then the third question would be more along the lines of what it really says down at the bottom of 2-6, which is, start with the pilots. If they're a success, then you go with the aim of getting to broader implementation, considering all Portland area highways, using additional evaluation. You can put those caveats in there. Remember, these questions, and I think somebody made this point, maybe it was Ryan or maybe it was Judith, these questions or not actually what's the language is going to be in. The language is really in the text of the recommendation. So we'll use the responses to these questions to get the text right. So I think that would modify this bottom section on 2-6 to more reflect, do the pilots, get the additional valuation with the aim of getting to broader implementation considering all Portland area highways. And
then question 3.
No, that was question 3. So what would your question 3 be?
Where does C plus come in?
That's C plus.
That
is
C plus. Okay,
yes.
so the third question is the C plus.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Chris.
Sorry, and why is C plus not what that first thing under input on other topics? Isn't that basically C plus?
Wait, now you, oh, it might be. We may not need that.
Yes.
Yeah, we may not, yeah. It's essentially the same thing, yes. Garrett. Well, we'll ask Garrett.
It was not my intent to take up this much oxygen this morning. I think where we should be going, and I'm trying to re-articulate this, is the question 1 was B and E. Question 2 is B and E as leads to C.
Yes.
Question 3 is C. Simple.
But a broader C.
Well,
no.
No.
Okay,
Yep.
so question 3 is just C.
Keep it super simple. B and E as leads to C, and C.
Thoughts? Pam says yes. Eileen.
I just have a different take on this, because what I heard Chris say about the pilot projects and then what that might lead to was not only just C, and maybe not C. It might be something else entirely. So I was going to say, I don't think that question of the C plus is really the answer, because I could have heard that wrong, but what I understood was do your pilots, find out if that works, and then figure out where else it might work. Maybe it won't be C.
And that is what the third question, the way I rewrote it, that's what it intended. Yes. Well, let me get, Chris, are you still up? No. Okay, Ryan.
And I think C plus is handled under the PAC input on other topics where it's already listed as a question.
Oh.
So we'll get a chance to talk about that. I think we should move forward with Garrick's proposal.
All right, so what I'm hearing is the third question, as I stated it, is actually in the other topics. The third question that Garrick is proposing is move forward with C. C only. Move forward with C. C first. It's an old bank. C. I'm seeing a few head nods. The question is that the third question that we would respond to in the recommendations of this section is, does the PAC recommend moving forward with C? Yeah.
I think I see agreement around the table that
I
that's
think so
the
too.
question.
Yes.
So,
okay.
moving
All
on
right.
to
So
the-
we've answered question 1, right? Yes. Now we're going to answer question 2, which is, and I'll say it one more time, do PAC members support a recommendation to the OTC that advances the 2-tier approach, which starts with 2 smaller pilots, B modified E, projects, and includes a larger scale phased implementation on I-5 and 205, C? Okay, if you say you support, please put your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
This is B and E leading to C.
Yes, the 2-tier approach. Yes, B and E leading to C. Oh, okay, now you lost me. I got to count again. Put your hands back up, loud and tall. Loud and tall. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And what did we get here? The 2-tier approach from Curtis was yes. Priority should be placed on implementing a vision for the comprehensive approach, with the smaller projects being considered the first phase. So I think he's agreement. So 9, yes. Can you accept this recommendation? 1. Chris, is your hand? Okay. 2, 3, 4. Okay. And do you oppose this recommendation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right, so that takes care of the two questions that were in there. The third question now is, do you recommend starting with concept C? In favor? I mean, can support? Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Start with concept C. Okay, can accept it? Can accept starting with concept C? 1. And oppose starting with concept C? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pretty much the same response, huh, Pam? Is that what you got? You what? You want to do oppose, so that's 8 oppose. Okay, all right. Oh, yes, and we don't have anything from Curtis because we didn't have that specific question.
So just doing some math, the first thing adds up to 19 or 18, and the second one adds up to 17. So someone.
Curtis didn't have a response to this one. Thanks for checking, though.
Maybe we could
Keep us
footnote
honest.
that on the flip chart to be clear.
Yep. Okay. Whew. All right. Okay, so now we get to the other topics, which takes us right to the first other topic, again, was, and I call your attention to page 2-8, section 2.4, and essentially what this says, there are themes that were raised throughout the process by members of the PAC and the public. The most common shared themes are presented below. These are not recommendations, but things that you would like the OTC to really consider. Pam.
I just want to say thank you. I recognize that that was arduous and we went through a process here, but it really helps me individually go back to my community, and I think it helped all of us around the table clarify what we were talking about. So I do thank you for working us through that process.
Oh, thank you, and I appreciate all the contributions because I think it made it much clearer. So yeah, this was good, really good work. Thanks. So the question says, do PAC members support the suggestion that the OTC consider system-wide feasibility analysis of potential pricing applications on the regional freeway system? And so the question is summing up that paragraph above that, saying you should consider subsequent analysis that includes other critical freeways, including 84, 405, 26, and 217, and critical bottlenecks in the system, including the Interstate Bridge, the Boone Bridge, and the I-5 approach to the Glen Jackson Bridge. Yes,
And-
Matt, wait, I have, what?
I was just going to clarify that this is on the top of page 2-8 in the report, if you're referencing
said that.
that. Oh,
I did
okay.
say that.
Okay,
Didn't I?
sorry about that.
Page and section.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Matt and then Craig.
Thank you. Just want to make sure that the City of Portland strongly supports this, but it does provide an opportunity to quickly just make a comment on what Chair O'Halloran said right at the beginning, which was, I believe, an answer to Commissioner Savas about revenues and what they would be used in the system. And I would just hope that the system is not purely an ODOT system, but looks at our transportation, transit, as well as multimodal system.
Okay. So right now I think it says freeways and bottlenecks in the freeway system. So you're suggesting that should be broadened? Okay.
I'd like to chime in on this a little bit, because these are not the priority recommendations in your charter. These were the things we heard quite a bit of. And these will be questions where I do think there's going to be a potential for a lot of different perspectives, which is great. That's why we want you to have a letter. The topic specifically of revenue is a question. And so we don't need to qualify your response to this topic about the need to look broader at congestion pricing by the revenue topic. You can if you want, but we really did try to make this something that the PAC could work on as a group in this setting today. So I just wanted to say that that's kind of the intention.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, that this question can stand by itself.
It doesn't have to have the revenue component
so you
in
don't
it.
have to agree or disagree based on, but there is a place to make your recommendation about revenue, and the group can do it together, or the group can do it, individually, depending on how much time is left in the meeting today. But that, of course, would be a topic that could take many meetings, and will take many meetings. So this is phrased in this way to help provide some input to the Oregon Transportation Commission about what they need to be thinking about as important as they think about moving forward. So it's a little bit high level. So that's, I just wanted to clarify that intention.
Okay, thank you. Craig.
Thank you. We've heard a lot of conversation around this table about the interest in a more comprehensive look at value pricing, and my council is very interested in having that conversation. But we have a few concerns about the way the recommendation is worded. If we were to conduct a regional pricing study, we would likely want to look at different ways of implementing the pricing, which could include cordon pricing or a program using Origo, which is the general vehicle mileage fee, or even some other system. This would involve looking beyond the freeways and the highway system. I'm concerned about the assumption in the recommendation, the way it's worded, that a more regional look would only consider highways, and that we've already determined what entity would conduct that study. In most regions in the United States, the MPO has done the first set of analysis. That allows you to consider the entire system, not just those facilities that are owned by the state of Oregon. I don't think we need to make that decision today, but I'm uncomfortable with the language in here that assumes a regional study would focus on the highway system and would be done by ODOT. And I think that's a conversation we deserve to have amongst ourselves as a region later. Additionally, before we start a feasibility analysis, I think we as a region want to understand what various types of pricing would actually get us. When we look at a regional study, we don't really have any legislative direction there. So let's do this right and figure out what our policy goals are first. And if pricing can help to meet them, let's consider that before we jump into a feasibility analysis. The point I guess I'm making is I'd like the language changed so it doesn't specifically say look at highways and be done by the OTC or ODOT. But just that the analysis needs to be, the regional analysis needs to be done.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Paul.
Well, that's a totally different question, but
okay. Well, then let's do this first. Then
I think my part of my point being is I think that JPAC and TPAC need to be a big part of this.
I actually think it might be more useful to just focus on should it be freeway or should it be broader transportation, broader roadways, and not worry about who does it, because that has to be sorted out.
Well, but it says in here who does it.
Right, so I'm suggesting that it be silent on who.
Thank you.
But let's close on, do you want it to be freeway focused or do you want it to be broader? The suggestion from Craig is that it be broader, not just freeway focused. Ryan?
Well, Penny,
you are on that.
I wasn't finished. I just made a comment, but so the way the question's worded, it says the last three words, regional freeway system. So I'm okay with asking the question. All I wanted was, as worded, I just wanted clarification, obviously, that the word consider is synonymous with study. Of course it is, right? We're going to study it.
Yes.
Consider
yes.
study. But
yes.
I think that the way it's worded is, I'm happy with the question, and I think Craig's question is a completely different one. I'm willing to answer that. I'm willing to ask that question or participate in that discussion. But I think they're two different questions.
But you're saying not just constrain it to the freeway system. You're saying a broader
regional
look.
System needs to be analyzed.
Regional system, right? So not constrain it just to the freeway. So it is pursuant to this question, and then take out the OTC as your other suggestion. You're saying that you want it to be study. You want to make sure that it means study.
Yeah, I'm happy with the way it's worded.
Yes.
And
Okay.
intended.
Ryan and then Garrick.
So I'm also comfortable taking this question off the table and moving on to something else. But if we're going to be talking about the regional freeway system, we're talking about things that are done under the authority and control of the Oregon Transportation Commission. The idea that that's going to be done by someone else to talk about how those freeways are done, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I do think Craig has a point when he's specifically referring to the region having a conversation about broader things like the other arterials or other regional roadways. But as it goes to the OTC, I just think that it's got to be clear if we're talking about freeways, we're talking about the tolling authority, we're talking about the Oregon Transportation Commission. So I think saying if we want to explore the regional freeway system, larger, it does need to have that. But saying that you want to carry it beyond that, have the region explore other opportunities, including cordon pricing and other things, that might be a way to think about that. But I think we're getting into a much broader range than what this pack was set up to consider. And so if we want to talk about how we're going to handle tolling into the future, I think maybe we're maybe getting beyond our scope.
Well, and I thank you. These questions are beyond your scope anyway, but as I've been reminded several times, I think that we might be parsing it too finely, and I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that this question reflects. Remember, this reflects what we've heard discussed around the table, and if it's not right, let's fix it. And if it's not, if it's not a question that you even think you want to forward, let's don't do that. But let's just make sure this question is right. Eileen, what do you have to say?
I just want to clarify that the question will be dealing with analysis.
Yes.
And not determinations. It's just analyzing the whole system.
Yes. And the reason that it was said that the OTC analyze it is because that's where this report is going. There's no any further ownership issue than that. So, which is why I say don't get too hung up on who does what. Well, yeah, that was good. But rather, let's get hung up on, let's make sure who does what. What the what? Is it the freeway system, the regional freeway system, or is it the regional system? Freeway system, I heard, as it's written. Let's put it this way. Who is okay with the question changing consider to analyze, leaving it as the freeway system? Does anyone have any objection to that? I'm asking for objection to the question being worded as it is. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Chris?
So, yeah, so I would have to agree with Craig Dirksen, or Commissioner Dirksen, that we do need to be analyzing things other than just the freeways. So I'm a little bit worried if I say yes, I think we should analyze the freeways, but if I say yes to that, does that ultimately down the road put me in a box? That's as we see, each person's answer to these questions, we have different reasons for saying yes or no to each of the questions. We're coming from such divergent opinions there that I don't want to be lumped into a certain category when I'm actually in a different category. So I just hope that's all reflected.
Yeah, let me back up a little bit. What we've heard pretty consistently over a number of meetings is that this tolling discussion should not be confined to just I-5 and I-205. That's what we've heard, and we've heard other highways mentioned, which is the genesis of this question. I don't want to take our time today to try and ask you to come to a position as a group on something that hasn't really been discussed, which is going broader, other types of your other methods of managing congestion and so forth, cordon pricing and so forth. I want to keep it not, as Ryan said, kind of within the scope, but within the scope of what we've heard. And that's why this question is here, and that's why this section is here, is because we've heard a lot that you want to recommend to the OTC that they look broader than just I-5 and I-205. And as perhaps that's the answer, that you look broader than just I-5 and I-205 and don't dictate what broader means.
So, Penny, one way to clarify here, the recommendation is written the way it is because the recipient is the OTC. So these recommendations are written as though they are to the OTC. What I think I might be hearing around the table is it could be an addition of a couple of words about the OTC should consider analysis in collaboration with regional partners. So one of that change, I think, could potentially address what we're hearing around the table.
But that's a great addition, and if you look at those two bullets on 2-8, other critical freeways and critical bottlenecks in the freeway system, it is still confined to freeways, and so that's the question I'm asking. Do you still want this confined, is what we've been hearing, to freeways, or do you want it broadened? Freeways? Freeways? Craig, you want it broadened. Okay. I think you're going to need to put that in your letter. Okay? Because I think we're hearing a general group movement. Okay. All right. So thank you. You saw my empty bottle, didn't you? So with that, leaving the question as it is, recognizing as I think Kirsten's suggestion might be a good one. Anybody object to consider subsequent analysis with regional partners? I think is what she said. That's helpful, okay? So with regional partners. So Bernie?
Just one comment. I'd love to see some language that makes it clear that the committee's not recommending that we do this before we implement the pilot projects. So
Okay.
this is separate.
Yeah, okay. I think we can easily do that. Okay, so do PAC members support the suggestion that the OTC analyzes, after everything else is done, system-wide feasibility analysis of potential pricing applications on the regional freeway system? How many of you support that recommendation? Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus I believe we got a hands up, yes, from Curtis. So what did I just say, 10? 10, okay. How many of you can accept that recommendation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And oppose? 1. Okay, moving on. We have, can we retest? How many accept this recommendation? 1, 2, part 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm only seeing 6. Where are you seeing 7, Judith?
Yeah, I switched, so that's no fault. I thought it was late anyhow, so I'm gonna vote no.
Oh, you're no. Okay, then our math works. Okay, thank you. All right. I want to note we have 2 more questions. However, I also want to be cognizant of time. We are reaching the point where we wanted to move on. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to call these next 2 questions, and then if you have concerns about these questions, I'm going to ask you to address them in your letters, or tell me that you don't want to answer this question, period. So on the next question, this had to do with suggesting that the OTC develops a plan for future roadway and public transportation capacity increases in a congestion pricing environment. I'm on the bottom of page 2-8, and this has this is the section that says plan for adding capacity to accommodate future growth, and the 2 bullets of the recommendation say, as the region grows, we need to plan to accommodate growth in a congestion pricing environment, and mobility for a growing region should consider adding capacity for roadways and public transportation. That's what this recommendation is about. So how many of you support that recommendation? 1, 2, 3, wait, okay. Everybody put your hands back up again. Those came up slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I think we got a yes from Curtis. Yes, so 8. How many of you can accept? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 accepts. Did I count wrong? Please accept again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I only see 6. 7. There you are. And 8. Okay. All right. Thank you, Emma. Keep me honest. And oppose? Any opposition? 1. Thank you, Garrick. Don't like the way it's written. Okay, all right. And you? I want to do that. Instead of accept? Okay, make accept 7 and 2 abstentions, I guess that's called. Okay. And then moving on to the last one that was here, the revenues from I-5 and I-205 pricing. This has to do with where they're used, and it says use them for congestion relief within the region. Recognizing that there's a congestion relief fund, provide congestion relief in the Portland region, including added capacity for roadway and public transportation mobility, and to mitigate negative impacts of congestion pricing to low-income environmental justice communities and communities near the price facility. And I'm on page 2-9 in case you're reading along or wanted to. So the question is, do you support the suggestion that the OTC use revenues from freeway tolling to provide benefits within the region where the revenues are collected for congestion relief and mitigation strategies? Okay, quick.
Clarifying question?
Go ahead.
Is that Region 1 Act or the Portland Metro region?
Good question. We struggled with that.
I would think it'd be Region 1 Act, given that this is an ODOT issue, but I think it can even be thought of, we're trying to capture what we've heard. And so, like I've heard about the Boone Bridge, and that's maybe slightly outside or within. So I don't think it's necessarily about precise boundaries as it is about the value of perhaps not way outside in the southeastern portion of the state, because at this point that's not precluded.
Okay, I'm going to go Roy, and then Pam, and then Ann.
Just for clarification, we'd only support if it's limited to projects of regional significance. Is that implied within there?
I don't know.
That's not a formal implication.
Okay,
so
it's not in. So we'll,
it's not in.
So we'll oppose. Okay.
Okay. Pam.
And our support was based on region, not Region 1 Act. And the thought process behind it was to support the revenue going to where people pay for it.
Okay. All right, Ann.
And I would agree with Pam. We were looking at the improvements should be tied to the corridor where the revenue was generated. That would benefit the people who paid that toll.
Okay. Yes, Marie.
And we would want to make sure that it complies with the Constitution and not a way to bust or circumvent the Highway Trust Fund.
Okay, Paul?
I would agree with Ann, whether the words change to facilities or corridor, either way. If it's facilities where the revenue's collected and is spent on the facilities, yes.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to propose in the interest of shortness of time. I think what the language should say in the report is that there isn't agreement around the table in terms of exactly where the revenue should be dedicated, but in terms of the question that it should be for congestion relief and mitigation strategies. How are you with that? Is that right? Yes, Marion.
I don't know how you say it, but I think the idea that there is support for keeping it in the region, and that's not quite defined exactly, but I think if it's the open question of whether monies in this congestion relief fund can be spent on the South Coast or something like that, I would hope that we all agree that it should stay here, however that ends up getting defined.
Thoughts about that? Is that generally accurate? It's not, because, Ann, you're shaking your head no. Why?
Because the region, as it grows, will be extremely large, but if people are paying a toll in a specific area, we feel there's the capacity to keep that money in that corridor.
Okay, nice try, but I don't think we can get there. In the interest of time, I see 4 more cards. I'm going to go to Jessica because I haven't heard from you for a while.
So I think that I think Marion's on the right track. I think that what we need to say is that there's interest in because I think there's consensus that it should be used within our region with differences in the degree to which
Exactly.
the localization of that region.
I think that's how we would reflect it. Yep. And Ryan?
So I think the answer to that question is that we all agree that these funds should not be spent outside the region.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The specificity to which we mean that in a corridor or within our region or other things may vary, but we all
Correct.
agree that it should. Okay.
Correct. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, and we may not even have to ask this question then, but in any event, I actually think there's something in statute that relates to this, and
Yes.
maybe ODOT staff should go back and, I think that the statute may already say this.
Matt?
I just wanted to reiterate the corridor is important to the city of Portland at this point.
Okay, all right, okay. All right, so given that we are not going to have agreement on the specific definition of the region, but leaving the region as it is in the question, how many support this recommendation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whoops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You get 9? And with yes from the port, yes. 10, and I think Craig might have. Craig, did you just put up? Yep, okay, 11. All right. Accept. How many can accept this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And opposed? 1, 2. Is that 19? Oh, you see, that's why I had you check, because I can't add. Okay. No, it's 18 is what our goal is. Okay, wow, you know, I just have to say, Eileen, I'm going to give you a word here, but I just have to say, wow, good work, you guys. Amazing. Yes, Eileen.
I just wanted to request that my vote on the previous question, not this last one, the previous, be changed from yes to accept.
Okay, so we'll
Thank
take
you.
7 down. That goes to 7, and the next one goes to 8. Okay, thank you, Eileen. I want to go to the next steps, but I just very briefly, I wanted to ask your two co-chairs, speaking on behalf of the OTC, were there any other questions that you were hoping to get input from on this group, or do you think you've gotten, you know, enough to chew on?
I think we have more than enough to chew on, personally. But I first and foremost just want to thank everybody for sticking through this and engaged. And as Bertie walks out on us, we'll just wish him his best for the rest of the day. No, we just want to thank everybody for their time and their investment of their time and just pushing through this process. It's been a really long time commitment. I believe 8 months when we first started this. So I'm glad that we're actually to this point. I will make sure to mention again that, you know, July 12th is going to be popping up real soon, so I highly encourage everybody to be present. If there's things that, given the time constraints today, since I would assume we could have probably been here till the stars start coming out tonight, but if there are things that you felt like you needed to get off your chest or to address still, there's still obviously one other step in this process. And just to keep in mind that it's not solely just Commissioner O'Halloran and I, there's 3 other commissioners, that are going to be present, obviously, at that meeting. And I think your voices are going to be very important, and even your constituents and stakeholders' voices are going to be very important at that meeting as well. But long story short, this first step is pretty much complete, sounds like, as we've gotten to some voting consensus and not consensus. But for the most part, we've gotten direction. And I personally have heard a lot of feedback and a lot of good insight about how we can really implement this system that can truly provide a value add to the region and all of our stakeholders and our taxpayers. So as we are going to keep moving forward, because obviously, as we've seen, there's a lengthy process in this. Again, I'm just going to highly encourage everybody to stay engaged, be involved, and keep your voices heard, as this is probably one of the most complex things we've encountered over the past decade or so, but I'm optimistic that we're going to find solutions that are going to benefit all Oregonians and Washingtonians at the same rate. So thank you.
Thank you. Sean?
Again, I want to echo Commissioner Simpson's comments and really just sincerely thank everybody for the time, effort, and energy that has gone into this. We have learned a ton. I've personally learned a ton from everybody, and I think it gives us a much deeper perspective and understanding of what's entailed here. But I do think that we need to address the issues that have been raised, excuse me, including mitigating diversion, and also note that congestion causes diversion. Right? Sitting in traffic makes people want to get off these corridors and try other routes, and one only needs to try Waze to see that there are computer programs that will encourage you to use diversion. So I think we have to look at that. We have to look at the environmental impact and impact to low-income communities. We have to build capacity. We have not kept up. We have to look at freight corridors. How we move goods to market, both in and out. Our population's exploded, and our transportation infrastructure has been largely frozen with design and capacity that was created in the 1960s. It doesn't work anymore. So I think that the governor's Transportation Vision Panel looked long and hard, and I think everyone around the region and around the state said Portland congestion was a major factor, whether you're in Eastern Oregon or no matter where you are, that Portland congestion mattered. So we have to look at it, and I'm of the mind that we need to go more comprehensive, and that perhaps create a Portland ellipse that would look at where does congestion really exist and where's the population? This would include kind of creating a circle around Portland that would look at I-5, I-205, 84, 405, 26, and 217, and really look at it in how we would do it in stages. I realize this will not be popular, but if we want to be honest about where we're congested, about addressing it in terms of getting in and out of Portland, that's what it's going to look like. We can have a lot of discussions about how we would phase it in, how we'd implement. But really, if you want to deal with alleviating some of the problems created, you have to be more comprehensive and draw a circle or ellipse. And so I think we can talk about that. I think we need to look at where can we create new capacity, and that includes connecting 26 to 30 into North Portland. Can we ease some of that? And I think some of the public comments have reflected it. We have to look at mitigating bottlenecks. We have to look at creative things like public-private partnerships. Are they feasible to do any of this? We have to increase transit options. We have, if we're gonna put pressure for people to get off the highways, we have to give them alternatives on how they can get from point A to point B. This right now is only viable in a few corridors. In 84 and 26, it's viable. I think we need to look at have we really done all we can do to encourage and incentivize high occupancy vehicles and carpooling and alternatives. And I think that cycling, I think, is also an option. We have to look at what are the other ways to get around and being creative about it. But we need to make sure that we have bus lanes, and I don't know, maybe ferries can come back, and there are some proposals. But I think we have a river system that's not fully utilized, and I think we really need to look at all of it. And I know that I've learned a lot from our friends in Vancouver and Clark County. And I know that they don't want to be singled out, that they're part of this community, that historically this was all the Oregon Territory, and we have one little river that's quite mighty dividing us. And I think that I know that people from Vancouver want to spend time in traffic no less than people in Portland and anywhere else in the region. But the problems we have can't be addressed without investment. And we all have to have skin in the game. It has to be a user fee based system. It isn't free. Creating capacity and addressing this issue costs money. And we're all going to have to be part of it. I understand not wanting to be singled out. We on the commission, I think, are going to look at how do we look at this comprehensively to be equitable, and that it really focuses on a user fee based system, that those who benefit from the system are investing in it, and that those funds invested should be used to reinvest to address these issues that we've been discussing. Transportation's not an entitlement. It costs money. It does not come from income tax, right? And the historic methods of paying for this system are not going to get us into the future. They're not going to work, and we've got to get caught up on this stuff. So they're not free. They do cost money, and I think that collectively, I think we've learned a ton. I think we will walk into the commission with knowing a very diverse frame of reference and point of view, much better educated than when we started this process, and it's because each and every one of you took the time and energy and effort and investment to be here. So I know that the recommendations that we go and the direction we go will not solve all of the problems. They will not address everybody's concerns, and we will do our best to incorporate as much as we can, but then also take a big step forward in trying to address these issues that are truly regional. And we have to look at it much broader. But I think that, again, this process has helped inform us and will play into how these ideas and concerns manifest themselves in policy that improves people's quality of life in this region. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I did want to very briefly remind you of two timeline things, both your signed letters as a PDF, please, sent to me, and the comments, any comments that you have on the final summary, the summary from this meeting, are both due to me by Friday at noon. So keep those in mind. And Pam, what's up?
I just wanted to say thank you to Alando and to Sean for convening this group. The other thing I'd like to mention is, as we move forward, I would like to encourage all of us to be considering the collaborative nature of housing and transportation and how we have to look at both sides of that equation as we move forward and work collectively.
Thank you. Before I go to Paul, I'm going to very briefly make sure I get this, go over this before you guys escape. As was mentioned, there is the special OTC meeting on July 12th. You have a flyer with all the details about that in your packet. Then the next steps, August 16th, 17th at the regular OTC meeting. That's where they're going to provide direction to ODOT on the proposal to FHWA. Then the team will be busy writing that proposal and will be posting updates online and via email. Another OTC meeting on November 16th where they will consider the draft proposal. Legislative days, again, this was asking about the process, report to the legislature on whether value pricing can address funding needs for I-205. And then by December 31st, the application to FHWA will be submitted. So I wanted to make sure that you know that you have this schedule as a reference for kind of the next immediate steps for the rest of the year. And with that, Paul?
Yes, I just want to thank the OTC commissioners, both Commissioner O'Halloran and Commissioner Simpson, as well as the remainder of the commissioners on the OTC. I want to point out, I just want to read something that was very interesting. I'm not done reading all of the police reports and accident reports on some of the third lanes of I-205, but I want to read one that really captured the significance for Clackamas County and safety, because we have a lot of complaints about safety as due to the crashes and diversion of congestion. And here it goes. This is a deputy interviewing a constituent after a rollover accident at the hospital. In the emergency room located at Meridian Park Hospital, and learned the following. She told me that she was driving to the airport, and due to the high volume of traffic, she took a shortcut and had planned to use Southwest Stafford Road to access I-205. So this is rush hour. The accident was at rush hour, and simply cutting through the area to divert an accident. An area where we have most of the accidents there are actually rollovers.
Thank you. And so I would say, and we're going to get done 4 or 5 minutes early. Thank you. I would want to thank everybody for your great participation on this committee. And I would say that the Policy Advisory Committee has completed its business. Thank you very much, everyone.